Welcome to Dracula Harry. Today's adventure: what if Alucard found Harry in the cupboard and turned him into his apprentice at age 7? If you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1. The cupboard under the stairs. The rain in Surrey arrived precisely at midnight, obedient to a contract no one had signed. It tapped the conservatories and the slate and ran in thin parallel lines down the windows of number 4, Privet Drive. The road itself was a record of nothing in particular. Lamps in regular intervals, hedges trimmed into the shape that betrays the absence of imagination, a pebble path that had not been disturbed by anything heavier than a paperboy in 9 years. The figure that turned into Privet Drive did not so much walk as exist forward. He wore a long red coat that should have caught on the wind and did not. The crown of his hat shed water the way water knew better than to remain on him. Round amber glasses caught the streetlight without giving anything back. His boots left no print on the wet pavement, though the pavement remembered being walked upon and did not enjoy the memory. He had been sent. In a townhouse in central London, behind a desk of beeswax and old oak, Sir Integra Fairbrook, Wingate's Hellsing, had read a file that morning and given an order. The file had carried the watermark of the Bureau and the signature of Walter C. Dorners. Reports of a thaumaturgic disturbance in Surrey, the kind that ought to have escaped Bureau notice except for the regularity of its pulse. A signal, a heartbeat that should not have been there. "Go and see," Integra had said. She had not lifted her eyes from the file. The cigarette in her glove was not yet lit. "If it is one of theirs, leave them their pride and walk back here. If it is one of ours, do what you do. And if it is something the philosophers have not had the courtesy to name," she had looked up, "then name it, servant, and bring me your findings." He had bowed, a bow that did not move the air, and then he had taken the long walk south. Now he stood at the foot of a hedge in Privet Drive and turned his head slowly until the angle was correct. The pulse he had come to find was not in any of the upstairs windows. It was lower. Beneath the staircase of number 4, he went up the path the way a tide goes up a beach. The latch did not require him to open it. The hinges did not register his weight. The hall smelled of cooking oil long cooled and the dust of a vacuum cleaner used punitively. 3 coats on 3 hooks. A pair of small trainers tucked at an angle that meant their owner had not been permitted to leave them as they had fallen. He stood before the cupboard door. For 30 seconds, perhaps longer, he did nothing. He listened. He measured. A child's pulse, slow for sleep, but not for fear. A faint, regular pressure against the inside of the door, where a small forehead rested in the manner of a creature who had learned that one wall did not strike back. Beneath the human rhythm, another. A second pulse, not of blood, but of something pretending to be blood. A scar that beat in a geometry he could read. Old, that pulse. Older than the body that carried it. A fragment of someone else badly hidden, throbbing in dimensional patterns the Bureau filed under non-existence. The vampire smiled. It was not a smile that had ever cheered anyone. He took off his glasses, folded them, and placed them in his coat pocket. He took off his hat and held it against his chest in the gesture of a guest who has been invited. He did not bother to open the door. He turned the latch with a single finger, and the wood remembered that it had always been hinged. The cupboard was a triangle no taller than a man's hip and no longer than a coffin. A mattress along the floor. A blanket too thin for the season. A single light bulb on a string. The bulb was off. The boy was awake. The vampire crouched. The child's eyes opened the rest of the way and found him. A thin, dark-haired boy with a face that belonged to someone older. Spectacles patched with surgical tape. Pajamas that had once been a costume of a normal childhood and were now a costume of survival. A scar on the forehead in the shape of a question, weeping no blood but a kind of light only the dead could see. The boy did not scream. He looked at the man in the red coat. He looked at the open door. He looked at the man again. "Good evening, sir," he said. The voice was small and even. There was no fear in it. There was no eagerness either. It was the voice of a child who had decided politeness was the only consistent weapon he was permitted to carry. The vampire considered. "Good evening, police boy." The new title settled in the cupboard like a sheet over furniture that had stood untouched for years. "Are you a doctor, sir?" "No." "Are you here to take me to a children's home?" "I am not." "Then are you a robber?" The vampire let himself laugh quiet. "I am all of those," he said, "and none." The boy considered this with the seriousness of a much older man. He sat up. The blanket fell from his shoulders. The thinness of his arms was a kind of accusation against the rest of the house. "I am supposed to call the police, sir, if a stranger comes in," Aunt Petunia said. "Did she?" "Yes, sir." "And do you intend to call the police, police boy?" A long pause. "No, sir." "Why?" "Because she did not mean it for me. She meant it for her son." The vampire's smile did not widen. It changed depth. He set his hat on the mattress the way one places a coat over the back of a chair in an old friend's parlor. "Tell me your name." "Harry, sir, Harry Potter." "Tell me your age." 7, sir." "Tell me how long you have lived in this room." "Always, sir, I think." The boy paused then, with the same evenness. "It is not really a room." "No, it is a cupboard, it is. They will be angry that you have opened the door." "I do not doubt it." The boy lowered his eyes and raised them again. "Sir, will I be in trouble after you go?" The vampire did not answer immediately. 2 heartbeats. 3. He had been to many rooms in many countries. He had walked through cellars that smelled of fear and parlors that smelled of greed. He had seen children weep and children bargain. This one bargained for the period after his visitor left. As if the visit itself was already an accepted weather event, and the only relevant calculation was what came after. The pulse on the boy's forehead beat against the dimensional grain like a third heart. The vampire could feel a soul inside that scar that had no business being there. Not Harry's. Another, smaller, frightened in a different way. "Hungry, trapped. You will not be in trouble," he said. "After tonight no one in this house will trouble you again. I give you my word." "Will you make them die, sir?" The question was politely asked, the way one might ask whether the rain would stop by morning. "No," said the vampire. "My mistress would be cross with me. They will live, police boy, and they will live remembering. That, I think, is worse." The child accepted this with a small nod. "Are you a vampire, sir?" The vampire let his head tilt a fraction. "What an interesting question. You have very red eyes, sir." "Yes." "And you have come at night." "Yes." "And you do not breathe between sentences." "Police boy." "Yes, sir." "Stand up." The boy stood. He was so small that even crouched, the vampire had to lower his chin to look him in the eye. "I am going to make you an offer," the vampire said. "It is the kind of offer that is never asked of a child. I am told that this matters, so I will ask anyway. Are you listening, police boy?" "Yes, sir." "There is a creature inside the mark on your forehead. It is not yours. It would, in time, eat parts of you and leave the parts it did not want. Do you understand?" "Like a tapeworm, sir." "Yes, very like a tapeworm, only worse." "All right, sir. I can take you with me to a house where men and women will teach you how to remove such tapeworms. They will teach you many things. The cost will be your humanity. You will not grow old as the other children grow old. You will see what the dead see and walk where the living do not walk. You will drink, police boy, and what you drink will not come from a kettle. Do you understand?" "I think so, sir." "You may say no," the boy considered. "If I say no, sir, then I will close this door behind me, and the people of this house will trouble you no further out of fear of me, and you will live in this cupboard until you are old enough to leave it under your own power. And if I say yes, then I will give you a single drop of my blood. What will it do?" "It will make you mine." The child looked at him. "That does not sound very nice, sir." The vampire's mouth opened in a laugh that did not reach his shoulders. "Police boy," he said, "I assure you it is not, but I am the kinder option in your room tonight." A long silence. "All right, sir." "You agree?" "Yes, sir." "Say it again." "I agree, sir." "Look at me when you say it." The boy looked. Green eyes behind cracked spectacles. The scar over the right eye pulsed twice and waited. "I agree, sir." The vampire reached to his own throat. A nail, longer than it ought to have been, opened a small cut. A viscous drop welled and hung. He held it out on the tip of his finger. Open. The boy opened his mouth. Close. The boy closed his mouth. For perhaps a second the cupboard was silent. Then the bulb on its string flickered and burned out, and the scar on the boy's forehead flared one final time and went still, the way a coal is smothered. Inside the boy, the second pulse, which had been a tapeworm pretending to be a god, found itself caged by something older and colder than any caging it had previously imagined, and screamed in a voice nobody but the vampire could hear, and was filed away for later. Welcome, police boy. The boy blinked. He felt nothing different. He felt everything different. He could hear the central heating in the walls. He could hear, 3 streets away, an old man rinsing a teacup. He could hear, immediately above them, his uncle's specific brand of snoring. The vampire stood up, retrieved his hat, retrieved his glasses, replaced both with the small, theatrical precision of a stage magician closing a parlor trick. Come. Yes, sir. You may bring nothing. Yes, sir. Out into the hall, past the 3 coats on 3 hooks, past the cooker. The vampire paused at the foot of the stairs and looked up. He did not raise his voice. Petunia Dursley. The snore upstairs caught and stopped. Vernon Dursley. The bed springs creaked. Dudley Dursley. A whimper. The boy upstairs began to cry without knowing why. Listen to me, household. I am the gardener of an organization you have never been permitted to hear of. Tonight, I have taken from you the child you starved in your cupboard. He is no longer your business. He is no longer your obligation. If at any hour of the rest of your lives you speak of him or look for him or ask after him, I will come back to this house, and I will come back through your door. Do you understand? There was no reply. There was no need. Very good. Sleep well. He turned and held out his gloved hand. The boy took it. They went out through the front door, which closed behind them without being touched, and the rain stopped exactly when the latch settled, because rain in Surrey is occasionally polite. A black car waited at the curb. The driver was an immaculate older gentleman in a grey suit and white gloves. He inclined his head with the discretion of a man who had inclined his head at the entrances of many strange houses. Sir, Walter. And this is the anomaly. This is Harry Potter, aged 7. He is also the anomaly. I see. Walter Dorners looked down at the boy with the calm interest of an old butler appraising a new piece of furniture and finding it agreeable. Good evening, Master Harry. Good evening, sir. Sir Integra will wish to be informed. Inform her. The car door opened. The boy stepped in. He sat in the rear seat with his thin hands folded in his lap and his back straight against the leather. The vampire took the seat beside him. The car moved off, and the only thing that remained at number 4, Privet Drive, was the absence of a child no one would ever quite manage to remember. In the back of the car, the boy looked at the man in the red coat. There were many questions a child of 7 might have asked. He chose one. Sir, what do I call you? The vampire turned his head. The amber lenses caught the streetlight. You may call me Master, police boy. Yes, sir, Master. Sleep, if you wish. Yes, sir. The boy did not sleep. He watched, very carefully, the way the streetlights came and went across the upholstery, and he listened to the engine the way a much older boy might have listened to the breathing of a great animal he had been seated atop. He was 7 years old. He had just sold his death to a man in a red coat in exchange for a future he did not know how to imagine. For reasons he did not yet have the vocabulary for, he found that he was content. The car drove north. In London, in a townhouse on Tower Street, behind a desk of beeswax and old oak, Sir Integra finished a cigarette, picked up the telephone receiver, and was told what had been brought back to her. She listened in silence. She did not interrupt. When she replaced the receiver, she looked once at the portrait on the wall, of a man with whiskers and a stern jaw and a regimental sword, and she sighed in the precise manner of a woman who suspects she has just been handed an heir. Bring him to the study, Walter, she said into the intercom. When you arrive. Yes, madam, and Walter, madam, find the boy a glass. A glass, madam, a stemmed glass. He will be drinking from it shortly. He may as well begin learning to hold it properly. Very good, madam. The line clicked off. She reached for another cigarette and did not light it. Outside, the lamps along Tower Street burned, and the rain that had stopped in Surrey began politely to start again in Westminster. The motorway came up to meet them. Then the slip road. Then a series of B-roads with no street lamps and no traffic, where the hedgerows rose so close on either side that the headlights only made a tunnel of green and black before them. Eventually, the road forked. Walter took the narrower fork. The narrower fork ran 1.5 miles between an avenue of yew trees that had not been pruned since the war and ended at a pair of wrought iron gates that had not been kind to those who had ever wished them open. The gates opened anyway. The drive bent. The drive lifted. The drive declared itself, and a country house came into view at the far end of it. A long Georgian house in pale stone, 3 stories, 12 bays, with the kind of disciplined symmetry that the 18th century had imposed on its hosts and the rest of England had largely forgotten. 2 of the upper windows were lit, the rest waited. "This is where we live," said the vampire to the boy, with what might have been gentleness if anyone had been pressed to name it. "It is called the Manor. It is not in any way that matters ours. We are its guests." "Yes, sir." "You will be a guest of it also." "Yes, sir." "Walter, sir, bring the car around to the south door." "Sir." The car stopped beneath a portico. A footman came out who was not, the boy thought, entirely a footman. The footman opened the door. The boy got out. The gravel did not, to his surprise, hurt his feet. He had not worn shoes and he had not thought to ask for any. He had also not minded. The gravel was the gravel, and shoes, in his experience, were a question of permission. "Inside," said the vampire. Inside was a hall larger than the entirety of number 4, Privet Drive. A floor of marble in 2 tones. A staircase of dark wood that rose to a half-landing and split. A chandelier that had not been lit, that hung from a ceiling painted in cracked plaster patterns the boy could not pass. The smell of beeswax and old paper and something else. Iron, old iron. The boy understood the smell without being able to name it. He would learn later that the smell was the smell of a building that has held weapons since before the Crimea. A woman waited on the half-landing. She was tall. She wore a grey 3-piece suit of military cut, ungloved at the wrist, with a green cravat at the throat. Her hair was pale, almost white, plaited in a braid that lay forward over her left shoulder. She held no cigarette, though one waited in a tray on the landing rail, smoking patiently for her. Round spectacles, an expression that had been arrived at over generations and refined by single-child inheritance. She came down the stairs at the pace of a person who had decided that she would not arrive any faster than her own thoughts. The boy looked up at her. "Stand straight," murmured the vampire beside him. "Hands at your sides. Look at her when she addresses you." "Yes, sir." The boy stood straight. His hands fell at his sides. His chin came up the small fraction required to make his eyes meet hers and stayed. She arrived in front of him and stopped. "What is your name, boy?" "Harry Potter, madam." "And how old are you?" "7, madam." "Walter, madam." "He is too thin. Tell the kitchen." "Madam." She looked at the vampire. He returned the look. Neither of them spoke for the length of a held cigarette. Then she looked back at the boy. "You have made a decision tonight, Harry Potter, that most adult men of my acquaintance would not have had the spine to make, and you have made it without sufficient information. I will not punish you for that. I will, all the same, inform you of what you have signed. Look at me, boy." "Yes, madam." "This house belongs to a charter that predates the modern crown. Its purpose is the supervision and elimination of inhuman threats within the British Isles. Inhuman, in our usage, means anything from a poltergeist to a national security incident. We deploy assets to do this work. My servant in the red coat is the first of those assets. As of an hour ago, you are the second. Yes, madam, you will be educated, you will be tested, you will be expected to apply both. If at any time you decide that you cannot continue in this profession, you will inform me of that fact and we will discuss alternatives. Until then, you are mine. Do you understand? Yes, madam. Repeat it. I am yours, madam. Good. She turned a fraction to Walter without taking her eyes from the boy. The glass. Madam. Walter produced, from a small silver salver, a stemmed wine glass of the kind one might bring out for a particularly important guest at a dinner party. The bowl held perhaps 2 fingers of a thick, dark liquid which the boy looked at and did not flinch at. He had eaten worse things by choice in the cupboard. He had eaten less. Sir Integra took the glass from Walter and held it out. This is bagged donor blood from a clinical source, properly screened and properly stored. You will not, while a guest of this house, drink from a living person. You will not drink from an unwilling person. You will not feed from a person at all without my explicit authorization. We are not animals here, boy. We are gentlemen and ladies who have inherited a profession. Do you understand? Yes, madam. Drink. He took the glass with both hands. He had been holding plates and bowls with both hands for as long as he could remember, because Petunia had once told him that 1 hand was for cutlery and 2 hands were for the lower orders, and the boy was of the lower orders, and the boy had not questioned this until tonight. He raised the glass. He drank. The taste was very strange and not at all strange. It was the taste of being warm. It was the taste of a bath he had not been allowed to take at the right temperature. It was, somewhere inside it, the taste of his own mother, which he did not know how he recognized, and he stopped drinking when he had finished half of it because the half he had finished was already more food than he had eaten in 2 days. He held the glass out to Sir Integra. Thank you, madam. Finish it. Yes, madam, he finished it. He held the glass out to Sir Integra again. Walter, madam, take the glass and find the boy a room. Madam, which room? The blue one. The one with the window onto the rose garden. Madam, she finally lit the cigarette. The match struck. The smoke rose in a single thin column that disappeared into the chandelier darkness above. She looked at the vampire over the smoke. Servant, mistress, you did not consult me before turning him. He was about to be eaten by a guest in his forehead. I did not believe consultation appropriate to the urgency. HM, are you cross? She let the smoke rise. She watched the boy out of the corner of one eye while he stood, still, holding the empty-stemmed glass at the level of his belt, in the way someone has stood at attention for inspection. I am not cross, she said at length. I am, perhaps, surprised. He is a remarkably composed child. I noticed. I will not regret this in the morning. No, mistress. Take him upstairs, Walter. Boy, madam, the cellars are out of bounds without my permission until you are 9. The library is in bounds at any hour. You will eat at the kitchen table with the staff for the present time. There is a tutor coming on Monday for languages and arithmetic. You will obey her or you will obey me. There is no other choice. Do you understand? Yes, madam. Good night, boy. Good night, madam. She turned and walked back up the stairs. The cigarette went with her. The smoke remained, just slightly, in the air behind her, and was the kind of farewell that did not require a wave. Walter took the boy's empty glass and set it on the salver and put the salver on the hall table and offered the boy, with a small bow, a clean handkerchief. For your mouth, Master Harry, there is a stain at the corner. Thank you, sir. This way. They went up the stairs, the boy and Walter, with the vampire watching from the foot until they reached the half landing, where the boy paused and looked back. The man in the red coat had not moved. He inclined his head in a small, formal bow that was, the boy thought, the bow that an officer gives to a private of his own regiment when no one is watching. The boy returned the bow with the same gravity. Then he turned and followed Walter up the rest of the stairs. The blue room had a window onto the rose garden. The roses were, at that hour, the color of ink. The boy stood at the window for a moment, with his hand on the sash, and looked out at the dark shape of the garden the way a much older boy might have looked out at the country he was about to be sent to invade. Then he turned and let Walter show him the bathroom, the wardrobe of clothes that had been laid out for him, without his ever having been measured. The books on the shelf, which had been chosen for a child his age by someone who had thought about it carefully. And the four-poster bed, which had a coverlet of pale blue silk, that was the cleanest thing the boy had ever been told he was permitted to put his face against. "You will find," said Walter, "that the house knows your name by morning. Do not be alarmed if you encounter staff who address you as Master Harry. It is the staff's way of accepting an arrival. Yes, sir. You may call me Walter, Master Harry. I am not in this house a sir." "Yes, Walter. Do you require anything before you sleep?" The boy considered this very seriously. "Walter, Master Harry, I would like to know what is going to happen tomorrow." "Tomorrow," said Walter, with the smile of a man who has been asked this question many times by many recruits, "you will breakfast at 8 in the kitchen. After breakfast, you will go to the south study, where the master will give you your first lesson in the conduct of a guest of this house. At 11, there will be a brief medical examination conducted by Dr. Trevelyan, who is discreet and who will not hurt you. At 1, you will lunch with Sir Integra. At 2, you will be given an hour in the library to read whatever you choose. At 3, you will go to the back lawn, where you will be introduced to a young lady called Miss Victoria, who is, as you are, recently of our profession, and who has been instructed to consider you something rather like a younger brother. At 5, you will return to your room and bathe. At 7, you will eat with the staff. At 9, you will go to bed. Is that satisfactory, Master Harry?" "Yes, Walter." "Then I will leave you to sleep. The bell at the bedside is loud. Should you require anything in the night, ring it. Someone will come." "Thank you, Walter." "Good night, Master Harry." "Good night, Walter." Walter closed the door very gently. The boy stood in the middle of the room for a long time. Then he removed his pajamas, which were his only clothes, and folded them with care, because he had been taught to fold his clothes with care, and laid them on the chair the way Aunt Petunia had taught him to lay them on the chair. He put on the new pajamas, which were too big, but which were the cleanest things he had ever worn. He turned out the light. He climbed into the bed. The bed accepted him. He had never been accepted by a bed before. He had been accepted by a mattress once, perhaps. Beds had been other people's furniture. This was, he understood, his. He lay very still and listened to the house. The house listened back. The house was old. It had heard many recruits arrive in many rooms and lie still and listen to it for the first time. The house was good at this part of the evening. It knew the right amount of creak. It knew where to settle a beam and at what hour. It knew when to let the wind move along the corridor outside, gently, the way a nurse moves along a ward at the change of shift. The boy listened. After a while, when the house had settled and the wind had moved on, he heard, very distinctly, from somewhere deep in the building below, the sound of a man laughing. It was not a friendly laugh. It was not an unfriendly laugh either. It was the laugh of a man who has had a long evening and found that, at the end of it, he is pleased. The boy thought, "That is my master." Then he thought, "I will not be cold any more." That was the thought he went to sleep on. It was not large. It was not articulate. It was the only true thing he had ever been able to say to himself in the cupboard and not be punished for. And now, in the bed, he was permitted to think it without pretending he was thinking something else. Outside, in the rose garden, the no-life king stood under a yew and looked up at the boy's window, where a single shape had moved once and not moved again, and the smile he had carried with him out of Privet Drive widened by perhaps 1/4 of an inch. He stood there until the dawn began to bruise the sky on the eastern side of the house. Then he turned and went down to his own quarters, in a part of the cellar that had no electric light and no door handle on the outside, and the only living thing in the building that knew where he slept was Sir Integra Hellsing, and that was the way both of them preferred it. In the kitchen, the staff began to arrive for the day. The cook stoked the range, the under-housekeeper made tea, the butler set out the silver. A small, clean place had appeared at the corner of the long pine table, with a folded napkin and a cup that was the right size for a boy of 7. and none of the staff who arrived at the kitchen seemed at all surprised by the place, although no one had told them, in any specific way, that a boy was coming. The house had told them. The house was very good at telling. At 8 in the morning, Master Harry Potter came down the back stairs in the new clothes Walter had laid out for him, with his hair brushed, and his face washed, and his hands clean for the first time in living memory, and the cook turned around with a plate of bacon and looked at him. And the boy looked at her, and the cook said, "Good morning, Master Harry," in the matter-of-fact way of a woman who had been feeding children for 40 years and knew when one of them required feeding without commentary. "Good morning, ma'am. Sit yourself down. There's bacon and eggs. There's toast, there's tea, there's milk if you want it. Do you want milk?" "Yes, ma'am, please." "Right." The boy sat himself down. He ate. He did not, by long habit, finish his plate, because he had never been permitted to finish his plate at the Dursleys, and he had learned that leaving a quarter of the food was the right amount to leave to avoid being struck for greed. The cook noticed. The cook said nothing. When he had finished what he was going to finish, she came past behind him with the kettle and refilled the teapot. And as she went, she put a hand on the top of his head, very briefly, with the kind of casual ownership a woman of 40 places on the head of a child she has just decided is hers. The boy did not flinch. He had not been touched without intention to harm in any moment he could remember. He found, looking up at her, that he did not mind. He looked up at the cook. The cook looked down at him. Then the cook went back to the range, and the boy went back to his tea, and outside the kitchen window the sun rose into the rose garden and warmed the stones of the south wall. And the house, which had been listening, decided that this one might possibly turn out all right. In the south study at 8:30, the no-life king stood at the window with his back to the room, and watched a slow column of cigarette smoke curl up the curtain of the next window over, where Sir Integra was reading the morning papers, and the boy was shown into the study by Walter. And the boy stood at the center of the carpet with his hands at his sides, and the man at the window turned and looked at him, and the boy looked back. Neither of them spoke for a long beat. Then the man at the window said, very softly, "Good morning, my fledgling." "Good morning, master." "You slept?" "Yes, master. Did you dream?" "I do not think so, master. You will sit." The boy sat in the chair across from the desk. "Today," said the man in the red coat, "I will teach you how to address those who address you. Tomorrow, how to walk through a door. The day after, how to hold a glass. Within a year, how to kill cleanly. Within 4, how to be hunted and not be caught. We have time. We will not waste it. Are you ready, my fledgling?" "Yes, master. Begin." Chapter 1, Chapter 2. The manor years, the house took him in the way an old regiment takes in a new color. Quietly, without ceremony, and on the assumption that he would be folded into the existing arrangement before anyone bothered to comment. By the second week, the boy had been measured for 3 suits at a tailor in Jermyn Street, who attended at the south door, and did not require his customer to come into town. He had been shown how a fork was held in the left hand and a knife in the right and not the other way round, by an under-housekeeper whose patience was a thing of legend on the lower floors. He had been issued a small wristwatch with a black leather strap, because the master had said, dryly, that punctuality was a courtesy the dead owed to the living, and the boy had nodded at the master and put the watch on and never been late again. He learned the house by walking it. There were 48 rooms, including the cellars he had been forbidden, and he had begun, on the first morning he was permitted, the slow and deliberate practice of pacing each one of the 48 in turn. He committed the floors to memory. He committed the windows. He committed the way the corridor on the second floor bent very slightly to the south, because the 18th century had not entirely trusted right angles. He committed the route from his blue room to the south study, which was the route he would walk most often, and which he could walk in the dark by the end of his second month. The master did not always teach him directly. The master, the boy understood, was rarely awake before the sun was down. Lessons in the daylight hours were given by other instructors, Walter taught manners and weapons. A small, lacquered Romanian woman called Madame Petrushka taught languages, beginning with French and Latin and proceeding, when the boy had absorbed those without complaint, to Romanian and German and a curious dialect of Old English she said no one had spoken since the reign of Edmund Ironside. Dr. Trevelyan, who was neither precisely a doctor nor precisely a man, came twice a week to take the boy's blood and assess what was being done with it, and to ask him gentle questions about what he was hearing in the night, and to write the answers in a notebook with a rubber band around it. Sir Integra taught him history and the conduct of an organization officer, which she did at lunch, between cigarettes, with the directness of a woman who had been taught the same lessons at the same lunches by her own father and had not, in subject or in method, found a reason to vary the curriculum. It was the master who taught him the most important thing. The most important thing was stillness, my fledgling, master. Sit at the center of this room. Do not move. I will return in 3 hours. The room is not safe. Be still. Yes, master. For 3 hours the boy sat at the center of a room which was not safe. Bats arrived from the rafters and tested the rim of his ear and went away again. A spider, 3 times the size of any spider in nature, came across the floor and stopped at his right shoe and decided against it. A man came in who was not actually a man, with a long razor and the politeness of a barber, and stood behind the boy and considered him with intent, and went away again without comment. The boy did not move. He did not even, by the end of the first hour, blink without considering whether the blink would draw something to him. By the end of the second hour, he had begun to listen for the heartbeats of the men along the corridor outside, the way the master had taught him, and could number them. 4 guards on the south side, 2 on the east, the under-housekeeper coming up the back stairs with tea for the cook. By the end of the third hour, he had begun to know which of the heartbeats were nervous of him and which were merely nervous of the room. The master returned at the third hour exactly. The master stood in the doorway and looked at the boy for a small, theatrical moment. My fledgling, master. You have not moved. No, master, you have learned. Yes, master, tomorrow we will do it for 6 hours. The day after for the whole night. By the autumn, you will understand that motion is a luxury offered to the inattentive. Yes, master. The master inclined his head and went away again, and the boy stood up, and Walter, who was waiting in the corridor with a cup of warm tea and a clean handkerchief, said, "Well done, Master Harry," in the brisk tone of a man who had timed the exercise to the minute and had been confident throughout of the outcome. "Thank you, Walter. Tea?" "Yes, please." The blue room had become his by simple acquaintance. The window onto the rose garden remained a small ceremony of his mornings. He would stand at it for 2 minutes after dressing and look out at the roses, and then turn and pick up the book he was reading. The book at any given time was chosen by Madame Petrushka, who had decided that a child's curriculum should be heavy on poetry, and that poetry should begin with Virgil and end, after a long detour through the Provençal troubadours and the Persian quatrain tradition, with a Romanian poet called Eminescu, whose work she insisted the boy memorize 12 stanzas of by heart. He memorized them. He did not, at 7, understand them. By 8, he was beginning to. By 9, he was reading them out loud to Ceres in the kitchen, slowly, and Ceres was leaning on her elbow and listening with the kind of slightly stunned attention an older sister gives to a younger brother who has been allowed to grow up too fast. Ceres Victoria. Ceres was loud. Ceres was loud in a way that no other resident of the manor was loud, and which the manor had quite plainly decided to permit, because Ceres was, when one came down to it, a thoroughly nice young woman and a competent shot, and the only one of them under 30. She had a fringe of pale blonde hair that she could not quite be persuaded to keep out of her eyes, and a chirpy military precision in her uniform when she remembered the uniform mattered, and a way of saying, "Right then." At the start of almost every sentence, she addressed to the boy as though the sentence itself had to be approached with some kind of running start. Right then. Master Harry, are you eating your kippers? Yes, Miss Victoria. It's Sierra's, you Burke. Mr. Walter is the one who likes proper names. The rest of us are on biscuits and Christian names terms in this kitchen. Right? Yes, Sierra's. Better. Now eat your kippers, because I have to be on the firing range in 20 minutes, and the master will not be impressed if I have to escort you back to the South Study with skinny arms. Yes, Sierra's. Right then. She was, the boy noticed, the only person in the building who used the word master as a noun rather than a vocative. The master to her was the master, the way the weather is the weather, a feature of the climate. The boy thought about this carefully, in the way he had begun to think about most things, and concluded that what Sierra's had which the others did not have was the kind of casual ownership of being a vampire, which comes only from having been one for a relatively short time and not yet considering it remarkable. She still flinched, very slightly, at the smell of a particular brand of garlic powder. She still apologized briefly when she startled at sudden bright lights. She was, the boy understood, an apprentice, only a little further along the path than he was. She decided, in the second month of his arrival, that he was hers, and that was that. She brought him biscuits at 11. She read him to sleep at 9 when she was not on duty. She took him to the firing range on Sunday afternoons and stood behind him with her hand on his shoulder while he learned to mount a rifle that was, in the beginning, almost as long as he was. She let him cry exactly once, in the second year, when Dr. Trevelyan had told him, in the kind voice of a man delivering a verdict, that the slow change of his physiology meant he would never go through ordinary adolescence. And the boy had not understood quite what that meant until Sierra's had explained it to him in her own kitchen at midnight, in the chirpy, gentle, sister tone she did not use with anyone else, and the boy had let his face do, briefly, what his face had not been permitted to do since the cupboard. Right then, Sierra's had said when he was done, "That's that out of the way. Are we friends, you and me? Yes, Sierra's. Are you my brother? Yes, Sierra's. Then we look after each other, and we don't tell the master because the master will not understand it the way you and I understand it. Right. Right, Sierra's. Good lad." She had taken him down to the kitchen, where the night cook was Sandra, and Sandra was discreet, and Sandra had made him cocoa, which the boy was permitted, because cocoa worked on his constitution in a way that ordinary chocolate did not. And the three of them had sat at the long pine table at midnight, in the smell of bread rising for the morning, and the boy had drunk his cocoa, and Sandra had hummed an old song she had learned from her own grandmother, and the night had passed. He grew. He grew, in fact, very oddly. He grew quickly in the way the master had said he would not grow, until he was approximately the height and weight of an ordinary 9-year-old, and then he stopped, the way a clock stops when a finger touches the pendulum, and he was 9 for what seemed to be a long time. Dr. Trevelyan said this was correct. Sir Integra said it was inconvenient because she had begun to think of him as an officer in training and was annoyed that he had not yet reached an officer's stature. The master said nothing about it. The master had not been concerned with how tall the boy was at any point. By the end of his second year in the house, he had been taught to walk without sound on any surface in the building. By the end of his third, he had been taught to fire 7 different sidearms with either hand, and to clean each of them in the dark, and to identify each of them by the sound of its action being worked behind a curtain. By the end of his fourth, he had been taught to garrote a man twice his size with a length of monomolecular wire, although he had not yet, in practical terms, garroted anyone. Walter had insisted he learn the wire before he learned a knife, on the principle that a wire trained the hand for the kind of patience the knife did not require, and what was true of a knife was true of a sword, and what was true of a sword was true of the entire kingdom of close work. "Master Harry, Walter, your stance is wrong. Yes, Walter, move your left foot back 2 inches. There, your weight is now on the rear foot. Where do you put it when you wish to advance?" "On the lead foot, Walter, as I plant it, and when you do not wish to advance." It stays where it is, Walter. Good. Again. He did it again. He did it the next morning, and the morning after, and on Wednesdays when Walter took him out to the side lawn to teach him the small, careful things that meant the difference between an operative who lived past 30 and an operative who did not. By his 5th year in the house, he was working stances with Walter for 2 hours every morning before breakfast, in a thick canvas tunic that the kitchen had pressed for him while he slept. By his 6th, he was working stances against Walter, which was an entirely different exercise, because Walter, gentle as he was in instruction, was not gentle in correction, and the boy learned each of his deficiencies in the way one learns deficiencies from a butler who is also, in another part of his life, a sworn killer. It was at 9 that they took him on his first operation, a house in a Birmingham terrace that did not, on the outside, distinguish itself from any of the other houses on the street. Pebbledash, a small front garden of slate chippings, a brass number above the door, lights off in the front windows, lights on in the basement. Sir Integra herself had not come. Sir Integra rarely came. Walter drove. The master was in the back seat with the boy. Sears was on the rooftop opposite with a long rifle and a thermal sight and a quiet stream of commentary on the radio in the boy's left ear. Right then. I count 4 heat signatures in the basement. 2 adults, 2 smaller, no movement in the kitchen, no movement on the first floor. There's a 5th signature in the back garden that's not really a heat signature, if you get me. Cold spot. Confirm, police girl. Confirmed, master. Cold spot in the back garden. Could be a buried meal, could be a sentry, could be a dog. Don't think it's a dog. Acknowledged, police boy. Master, you will lead, I will follow. The police girl will fire on my mark. Walter will remain with the car. The cold spot in the back garden you will identify and disable on the way in. Are you ready, my fledgling? Yes, master. Then begin. He went up the path. He did not knock, because the door he had already established from outside was not properly latched, and he did not require to knock at a door that was not properly latched. He went around the side of the house. The cold spot in the back garden was a man-shaped thing standing under the washing line, which had not blinked at his approach, because the man-shaped thing was not the kind of thing that blinked. He walked up to it. The man-shaped thing looked at him with the indifferent face of a foreman regarding a child who had come to the loading bay by mistake. Good evening, sir, said the boy. The man-shaped thing did not reply. You will not require to defend the back garden tonight, sir. I am the gardener. The boy moved his right hand, which had not been visible, and the monomolecular wire was already past the thing's neck, and he moved his hand the rest of the way, and the wire passed entirely through, and the head of the man-shaped thing toppled onto the washing line. He did not have any particular feeling about this. He stepped over the body, which had begun, in a leisurely way, to crumble into the kind of grey ash that the manor had taught him to expect. He went in through the kitchen door, down to the basement. The 4 heat signatures had assembled themselves into a tableau of family life that was not, on close inspection, family life. A woman in a velvet dressing gown holding a child who was not, although she had once thought she was, her child. A man in a velvet smoking jacket with a face that had, somewhere in the last decade, decided to abandon symmetry. A small thing in a hood at the corner that had not been a child for at least a year. They turned to look at the boy when he came down the stairs, and they were arranged with the kind of attentive composure that suggested they were used to receiving guests. You are not a guest, said the velvet woman to him. No, madam. Then what are you? I am the gardener, madam. Whose gardener? My master's, madam. And who is your master, gardener boy? He is behind me on the stairs, madam. The 4 of them looked past him to the stairs. The man at the top of the stairs did not say anything. The man at the top of the stairs only stepped into the light, and the light, which had been a perfectly serviceable basement light bulb, took one look at him and dimmed several volts in apology. The velvet woman's expression underwent the small alteration of a person who has remembered, very late in the proceedings, an appointment she had hoped not to keep. Police boy. Master, open. The boy moved. The first cut took the velvet man through the jaw, and the second cut took him through the spine. And in the same fluid motion, the wire that had crossed the basement found the small hooded thing at the corner, and a third cut released the small hooded thing from the burden of standing upright. The velvet woman dropped the child she was holding and produced, from the sleeve of her gown, a curved blade which she did not get the opportunity to use. The man in the red coat at the top of the stairs raised a hand, and the air in the basement quietly compressed, and the velvet woman was no longer there in any sense that the basement was prepared to accept. The child she had dropped was not, in fact, a child. The child she had dropped had been bred to look like a child, which was a different thing. The boy looked at the child-shaped thing for the length of a slow exhale. Then he ended it without further ceremony, because his master had taught him that pity, applied incorrectly, is the cruelest of the available cruelties. Police boy. Master, pulse, steady master, hands, steady master. Are you tired? No, master. Are you hungry? The boy considered. Yes, master. The man in the red coat smiled the small smile he had smiled in the cupboard and reached inside his coat and produced a small silver flask, which he held out, and the boy took the flask, and the boy drank from it, and they went up the stairs together. And Walter was waiting at the kitchen door with a clean handkerchief and a flannel that had been soaked in cool water. And Walter looked at the boy and said, "Very well done, Master Harry," in the brisk tone of a man who had timed the exercise to the minute, and the boy said, "Thank you, Walter." And they went out to the car, and Ceres came down off the rooftop with her rifle slung and her face slightly flushed with cold, and they drove south, all the way back to the manor, and the boy slept on Ceres's shoulder in the back seat of the car the entire way, because at 9 he was still a boy. Even if at 9 he had also just executed his first family, Sir Integra was waiting in the south study when they came in. "Walter, madam, how did the boy perform?" "Without elevation of pulse, madam. He observed correct identification protocol on the back garden ghoul and led the entry. He took 3 of the 4, the master took the 4th. Mistakes? None, madam, on the evening's terms, and on tomorrow's terms." He paused for a 16th of a second over the child-shaped one, madam. "It is, in my opinion, a tolerable pause. It will close with practice. H.M. She turned to the boy. The boy stood at the center of the carpet with his hands at his sides. "Boy, madam, are you proud of yourself?" "No, madam." "Are you ashamed?" "No, madam." "What are you?" "I am at work, madam." She looked at him for some seconds. Then she nodded, once, the way one nods to one's own father in a photograph of one's own father, and she gave the boy what she had not given him before, which was a hand on the side of his arm with the kind of brief, formal pressure that meant, in the language of the house, that he was hers and that she was glad of him. "Go and bathe, boy. Sleep tonight. I will see you at lunch." "Yes, madam." "Servant, mistress, report at 3. "Mistress." The boy went up to the blue room. He bathed in the bath that he had now bathed in 371 times by his own count, and he climbed into the bed, and he listened to the house. The house listened back. The house had grown, in 2 years, considerably fonder of him, in the way that houses can grow fonder of a child they have decided is theirs. He fell asleep before the kitchen had finished cleaning the silver downstairs. He slept without dreams. He woke in the morning to the sound of Ceres knocking very softly at his door, and he ate breakfast with her in the kitchen, and the day proceeded. So went his 9th year. So went his 10th. By the end of his 10th, he no longer flinched at any of the ordinary daylight things which had made him flinch in the cupboard. He no longer flinched at any of the extraordinary nighttime things which had made him flinch in his first months at the house. He was a tall, thin boy with dark hair he wore long enough to brush the back of his collar, and a pair of round spectacles which he no longer required, in any optical sense, but which he had asked to be permitted to continue to wear, because Walter had said, with the deference of a butler, offering a private aesthetic opinion that they suited him. He drank his blood from a stemmed glass in the dining room when he was alone, from a folding flask in the field, and from a teacup at breakfast on the mornings when the cook had not had time to wash the proper glasses, and the cook had occasionally said, behind his back, that Master Harry had the manners of a 40th-generation duke, and the kitchen had agreed. He had not, throughout these years, been told what he had been before he had arrived at the manor. He had been told he had been born in Wales, and that his parents had died when he was a year old, and that his uncle and aunt in Surrey had not been kind to him, and that this last was the reason he had been taken into the organization's care at the age of 7. He had not been told the rest. The rest, Sir Integra had decided, would be told to him in the morning of the day he was tall enough to receive it. That morning came on a Tuesday in the late summer of his 11th year. It came in the post. The post was brought up to the south study at 8:30 every morning, and on this morning there was a letter that did not belong in the post. The letter was on heavy parchment of the kind that had not been milled in the British Isles for the best part of a century. The address was written in green ink, in a hand that had been trained in the era of dip pens and had not, since, condescended to a fountain pen. The address was so precisely accurate that it gave the boy's room, which was the second window on the 3rd floor of the south wing of the manor, and it required no envelope, because the envelope was the address, and the parchment was the letter. And the seal on the back was a wax stamp of 4 animals around a coat of arms. Sir Integra took the letter off the salver before Walter could put it down. She read it. She read it twice. She put it on the desk. She lit a cigarette. She sat back in the chair. She did not speak for 1 minute. Then she said, "Walter, Madam, telephone the bureau. Tell them that the boy has received an unsolicited offer of education from an institution within the British Isles, which is not on our books. Tell them I require the institution's standing, charter, and known officers by 10 o'clock this morning, and that I am not, under any circumstances, to be put on hold." "Yes, madam." "And then telephone the kitchen. Tell them I would like a second pot of tea, madam." She looked across the desk at the boy, who had come into the study for his 9 o'clock lesson and had not yet been dismissed from the previous 9 o'clock lesson, and who had accordingly been standing in the doorway throughout. "Boy, madam, come in. Close the door behind you. Sit down. I have something to tell you about your parents." He sat down. He listened. The story took her 17 minutes to tell. She did not embellish it. She told him what the Bureau had pieced together over the last 4 years, which was that he was the son of a man and a woman who had belonged to a society which had not, until that morning, been considered relevant to the organization's brief. She told him that there had been a quarrel within that society. She told him that the quarrel had taken on the appearance of a war. She told him that his parents had died in the war by the hand of a particular wizard who had not yet, despite the best efforts of the same society, been pronounced unambiguously dead. She told him that the tapeworm in his forehead, which her servant had filed away on the night of his arrival, had been a fragment of that wizard, and that, accordingly, his life and the wizard's were not done with each other. She told him, also, that an institution within the British Isles wished to educate him in the conduct of the society to which he had been born, and that he had received the institution's letter that morning. She placed the letter on the desk, where he could see it, and she pushed it across the polished oak with a single forefinger and lifted the finger when the letter was within reach of him. "Read it, boy." "Yes, madam," he read it. The address was a place called Hogwarts. The signature was a man called Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. The text was a polite invitation to enroll on the 1st of September, attended by a list of texts and equipment which Sir Integra had already, the boy thought, mentally priced. "Madam, boy, what is my position?" "Your position, boy, is that the organization owns you, and that I do not give my property away to institutions which have not, until this morning, been on our books." I have spent the last quarter hour deciding whether to send a polite refusal or whether to receive the institution's representative in person and refuse him at the door. I have decided on the door. Yes, madam. You will accompany me to the front steps when the representative arrives. You will not speak. You will stand at my left shoulder. You will be observed. You will not be moved. Yes, madam. Boy, madam, are you frightened? No, madam. Are you curious? He considered this. He considered, for the first time, the people he had not been permitted to know existed. He considered the wizard whose fragment had been filed away in him. He considered the institution whose seal had 4 animals on it, and the one-tip ink that had written his address in a hand that had been trained in the era of dip pens. Yes, madam, I am curious. Madam, boy. Is there a useful application for the curiosity? She looked at him over the smoke. She smiled, the small fractional smile she rarely smiled, which had nothing to do with amusement and everything to do with recognition. That boy, she said, is precisely the question I had hoped you would ask. We will discuss it after the representative has been refused. Walter, madam, the headmaster of Hogwarts School is coming to my front door at some point in the next 24 hours. I should like the front steps brushed. I should like the gravel raked. I should like the master in the South Hall, in his coat, with his hat off, between the doors of the library and the gun room, where he can be seen from the steps. I should like the boy at my left shoulder, in his second-best suit. I should like a tea service prepared in the event that I change my mind on the threshold. Madam, boy, madam, go and have your second-best suit pressed. Yes, madam. He went down the corridor and down the stairs and into the laundry, where the under-housekeeper looked at him and asked no questions and took the suit off its hanger and put the iron to it and put it back on its hanger and gave it to him without a word. Because the under-housekeeper had already heard from the kitchen that an institution was at the gates and the manor had decided to refuse the institution. The boy carried the suit upstairs with the care of a footman carrying a tray, and he put it on, and he looked at himself in the cheval glass beside the wardrobe, and a tall, thin boy in a charcoal 3-piece looked back. He did not, by any reasonable measure, look 11. He did not, by any reasonable measure, look human. He went down to the South Hall and stood at his master's left shoulder, where the master, who had been brought up from the cellar very early for the occasion, was waiting in his red coat between the door of the library and the door of the gun room with his hat off. And the master inclined his head to the boy, and the boy inclined his head to the master, and they waited. The headmaster arrived at 3:20. He arrived without warning and without a car. He arrived in the front garden, where there had been no man at 3:20, and where, at 3:21, an old gentleman was standing on the gravel in robes of a deep midnight blue, with a beard that came to his belt, and a pair of half-moon spectacles, and a small twinkle of expectation around the eyes. The footman opened the front door. Sir Integra stepped out onto the steps. She did not invite the old gentleman in. The boy stood at her left shoulder. The cigarette in her left glove burned in its careful column. Headmaster Dumbledore. Sir Integra, it is most kind of you to receive me. I have not received you. I have come out to my steps to refuse you in person. Ah, I have read your letter. I am familiar with your school. I am familiar with the war to which your society subjected itself in the last decade. I am familiar with the particular tapeworm that survived the war and which, as of an evening 4 years ago, has been filed away by my servant. The child is in my care. He will not be coming to your school. Sir Integra, I had hoped. You had hoped, headmaster, that the personal application of charm and the gentle weight of an established institution would, on the front steps of a private house, achieve what a polite letter would not. I am familiar with the technique. I employ it myself when the situation requires it. The situation here does not. The boy is mine. He will not be coming to your school. A small silence. The old gentleman looked mildly at her. The mild look passed across her shoulder to the boy. The boy returned the look, with the level politeness of a child who had been instructed not to speak and had understood the instruction. The mild look passed on to the man in the red coat. The man in the red coat returned the look with the kind of unblinking interest a wolf takes in a man it has decided not to eat for sentimental reasons. The old gentleman's twinkle dimmed. "Sir Integra, the boy is the subject of an old prophecy." "I am aware of the prophecy. The Bureau has had it on file since 1981. It is a poem. I do not deploy assets on the basis of poems. Sir Integra, the boy requires schooling in the use of the gift he was born with. He has been receiving it. He receives it daily. From a household of officers who have produced, between them, the only standing line of defense this country has against the precise kind of inhuman threat the boy's tapeworm represents. The boy will not be coming to your school, Sir Integra. He has friends his own age waiting for him at Hogwarts. He has had 3 biscuits at 4 in the afternoon every afternoon of the last 4 years, in the kitchen, with a young woman who is herself his elder sister in this household. He does not require friends. He requires officers. I am providing them, Sir Integra. Headmaster, a very long pause. Then I must request, with the deepest respect, that we negotiate some accommodation. The boy is, by accident of birth, the subject of obligations he did not ask for. Hogwarts is, by accident of charter, the only institution in the British Isles authorized to teach him to discharge them. We may, between us, be able to find a form in which both of our institutions are served." She looked at him. She looked at her cigarette. She looked at him again. "Walter." "Madam, tea. Madam, and bring a chair. The headmaster will be sitting on the steps." "Madam," a small flicker of surprise crossed the old gentleman's face. He absorbed it. He nodded. He took the chair Walter brought him, and he sat on it on the gravel at the foot of the steps, because the gravel was, the gentleman now understood, as far as he was going to be admitted. Sir Integra did not sit. The boy did not sit. The master did not sit. The tea was poured by Walter, in the open air, into 3 cups that had been chosen for the occasion to be not quite as good as the cups one would have used inside, but not quite as bad as the cups one would have used at a country station. The cups, in other words, of a polite but conditional welcome. They negotiated until 5. By 5, the terms had been agreed. The boy would attend Hogwarts on the 1st of September. He would attend under the formal designation of a field asset of the organization on loan to the school for the academic year. He would not be subject to detention except by Sir Integra's authorization in writing. He would not be subject to disciplinary expulsion except by Sir Integra's authorization in writing. He would not be subject to the school's protective wards in any way that interfered with his own protocols. The master, as a non-resident officer, would be permitted to enter the school grounds at his discretion in the event of an operational requirement, and Sirius Victoria would, in the event of operational requirement, be permitted the same, on the same terms. The boy would be permitted to drink from a stemmed glass at the dining table in the Great Hall. The boy would not be permitted to feed on staff or students. The boy would be permitted to feed, in writing, on members of the organization who were on the school grounds and who consented in writing on the date of feeding, of whom there would not be any. The boy would be assessed by the school's sorting on the first evening of term. The boy would attend lessons. The boy would not, under any circumstances, be subjected to the Triwizard Tournament should one happen to be convened during his attendance. Although Sir Integra had asked the question only because she had read in the Bureau's file that such a tournament had a habit of recurring at 100-year intervals, and the headmaster had said, gently, that such a tournament had not been convened in over a century and was not on the school's calendar, and Sir Integra had nodded, and the headmaster had nodded, and neither of them had foreseen that they would both turn out to be wrong on that particular point. Sir Integra signed the terms in a small fountain pen which had been her father's. The headmaster signed beneath her, in the green ink of his own hand. Walter took the document and put it in the inside pocket of his suit, and the headmaster stood up from the chair, and the chair was taken away by the footman, and the headmaster bowed, very correctly, to Sir Integra, and to the man in the red coat, and to the boy. And then he turned on the gravel and was gone with a small, inelegant pop, the way a candle is when one snuffs the flame between two fingers. "Boy, madam, you will be going to school in 3 weeks. Yes, madam, you will be representing the household. Yes, madam. You will not, while at school, embarrass us. No, madam, servant, mistress, you will tell him at length what I have not told him regarding the conduct of an organization officer on extended out-of-station deployment. You will tell him also, at length, what to do with the prophecy and with the tapeworm if either comes up. You will tell him, lastly, that I do not expect to hear from him by telephone except in the event of an operational requirement, that I do not expect to hear from him by letter except on the 1st of every month, and that I do expect him to take his Christmas leave with us at the manor, where his bed will be kept aired and his blue room kept dusted. Mistress, boy, madam, go and have a cup of cocoa with Miss Victoria. You have had a long afternoon." "Yes, madam." He went down to the kitchen. Ceres was waiting at the long pine table with 2 mugs of cocoa already poured. She did not ask, she had heard. She slid the mug across the table to him, and she leaned on her elbow and she watched him drink it, and when he had finished she said, right then, "Hogwarts," in the tone of a slightly older sister whose younger brother had been sent for a term at a school she had not herself attended, and the boy nodded over his mug, and Sandra, the night cook, brought a plate of biscuits. And they sat at the table together until the rest of the kitchen came down for supper. 3 weeks later, on the 1st of September, a long black car drove out of the gates of the manor at 8:30 in the morning. With Walter at the wheel and Ceres in the passenger seat, and a boy of 11 in a charcoal 3-piece suit and round spectacles on the back seat beside a man in a red coat, and the gates closed behind them, and the long black car proceeded to King's Cross. Chapter 2, End Chapter 3. The third-floor corridor King's Cross at 9 in the morning was a procession of trolleys and umbrellas. The man in the red coat did not get out of the car. The man in the red coat did not, by long doctrine, get out of cars in the daylight if it was not strictly necessary. Walter got out, Ceres got out, the boy got out. Walter took the leather trunk from the rear and balanced it on a brass-handled trolley with the casual precision of a butler who had also, in a different life, been a porter at the Carlton. "Master Harry." "Walter, the platform is at the column. You will find the brick wall to the right of the column. You will walk through it at a steady pace. The wall is not a metaphor." "Yes, Walter. You will not, under any circumstances, run. The wall does not require running. The wall responds to a steady pace." "Yes, Walter." "Miss Victoria will accompany you onto the platform. The master and I will remain with the car for 1 hour. You will board the train. You will wave to Miss Victoria from the window. You will sit in a compartment by yourself, if one is available. You will share with not more than 2 other children if one is not." "Yes, Walter. Master, Walter." The voice that came from inside the car was easy and unhurried and held the kind of small theatrical pleasure of a man watching a long-planned performance walk out onto its stage. "My fledgling." "Master, do not eat anyone, including the sorting hat." "No, master, go." He went. Ceres went with him. Ceres had on her best dark blazer and a grey skirt and a pair of glasses she did not require and which were entirely cosmetic. The kitchen had decreed that an elder sister escorting a younger brother onto the Hogwarts Express ought to look like an elder sister. Ceres took the trolley. Ceres led him to the column. Ceres put her hand on the small of his back and walked him through the brick wall at a steady pace, and the brick wall responded, as Walter had said it would. And on the other side, a long red train waited beside a long stone platform under a long iron roof. and the platform was thick with children and parents and owls in cages and cats on leads. Sears stopped. She looked at the trolley, she looked at the train, she looked at the boy. Right then, brother, yes, Sears, behave yourself, yes, Sears, and brother, yes, Sears. If they are horrible to you, you don't make a scene. You sit very still and you put your hands at your sides and you let them get on with it. Then you write me on the Tuesday after with the names and the times, and I'll come up at the weekend and have a word with them in the corridor where the prefects don't go. Right, Sears. Good lad. She hoisted the trunk to a porter who had stepped forward, and the porter loaded it onto the third carriage, and the boy boarded after it. He found a compartment near the rear that was empty. He sat down on the left-hand bench by the window. He set his coat across his knees. He waited. He waited very politely for 2 minutes, and then the door of the compartment slid back, and a girl with brown hair and an upper register he could hear approaching from 3 carriages away put her head in and said, "Excuse me, do you mind if I sit here? Everywhere else is rather full." "You are welcome, madam." She blinked at him. She sat down opposite him. She had a trunk which a porter set up onto the rack for her. She had a cat in a basket which she put on the seat at her side. She had a great many books in a satchel which she put on her lap, and immediately, on the principle that a stranger one had not yet been introduced to was less alarming if one was reading, opened. "What is your name, madam?" "Hermione." She looked over the top of the book. He was, the boy saw, the source of the upper register that had been approaching from 3 carriages away. She spoke in the firm, clear voice of a child who had been told that she was clever and who had decided to live up to it. "Hermione Granger. What's yours?" "My name is Harry, madam." "Harry Potter." "Oh," the book lowered an inch. "Oh," she said again, "I have read about you, in a book called Modern Magical History and in the Rise and Fall of the Dark Arts and in Great Wizarding Events of the 20th Century. You're a bit famous, did you know?" "I have been informed of this, madam, yes, by my superior at the briefing yesterday." The book lowered another inch. "Your superior?" "Yes, madam, sorry, you'd better start at the beginning, because nothing in the book said anything about a superior." He thought about this. He thought about Sir Integra's briefing of the previous evening, the long, careful list of things he was permitted to tell ordinary persons in the wizarding world, and the long, careful list of things he was not. He decided, with the speed of a child who had been trained to make these decisions at the speed of a senior officer, on the upper end of what was permissible. "I have, for the last 4 years, been the field apprentice of a private agency in the British Isles that deals with inhuman threats. I attend Hogwarts as a guest of the agency on loan to the school. My superior is the woman who runs the agency, who is also my guardian. I am required to address her as madam, which I do. I am required to call her servant my master, which I do. I am also required to behave well during my year at school, which I shall endeavor to. Inhuman threats. Yes, madam. Vampires and werewolves and so on. Yes, madam. Are you a vampire, Harry?" He considered her. She had, he saw, gone the small colour of someone who was about to be brave at considerable personal cost. He thought of Sears's instruction about making a scene. "Yes, madam." "Oh, I do not intend to feed at this school. I am subject to written protocols, which I have agreed to. You may, if you wish, ask the headmaster to confirm my standing under those protocols. You may also, if you wish, ask the porter to assist you in moving to a different compartment, in which case I shall not be offended, and shall, when the train arrives, send the porter to retrieve your trunk for you at no inconvenience to yourself." She did not move. She looked at him very carefully for some seconds. Then she nodded once. "That's a very polite offer," she said. "Thank you for making it. I'll stay where I am if it's all the same to you. I've read about vampires in 2 books, and they were both written before 1900, and the man who wrote one of them was a vicar in Wiltshire, which is not, I think, a qualification. I'd rather learn from you." "Madam, you don't have to call me madam. We're the same age. I have been trained to call all ladies who have been introduced to me by name madam upon introduction. You may, if you would prefer, ask me to revert to your given name, in which case I shall, after a period of adjustment." She considered him. "Hermione, please. Mr. Potter." "Hermione." "Harry." "Harry." The book went up again. She read a chapter without speaking. He looked out of the window. The train pulled out of the station. Then the door slid back, and a red-haired boy with a smudge on his nose put his head in and said, "Sorry, can I sit here? Everywhere else is mental." "You are welcome, sir." The red-haired boy stepped in. He looked at Hermione. He looked at Harry. He sat down beside Hermione without troubling to choose the side of the compartment. He let his trunk be loaded by a passing porter. He produced, from an inside pocket, a paper bag of sandwiches that smelled of corned beef and pickle. "Ron Weasley?" "Harry Potter." "Blimey. Yes, Ron is fine. Don't call me sir. My brothers'll laugh. Ron, brilliant. Pleased to meet you." He held out the bag. Ron Weasley, the boy understood without being told, was the kind of boy who held out his bag without troubling to think of the social weight of holding out his bag. Harry took a sandwich politely because he had been trained to accept the first hospitality offered by anyone in a closed space, and he ate the sandwich slowly, and he did not, although he no longer required to, taste anything in it except the salt. He had not had food that was not blood in 3 years. Sir Integra had not forbidden it. Sir Integra had simply not seen any practical reason for it. Ron Weasley filled the compartment with talk. He talked about Quidditch, and his brothers and his mother, and a rat in his pocket which he produced once and which the boy looked at carefully and did not, although he privately registered the rat as something that smelled wrong in a way he would think about later, comment upon. Hermione, after a quarter of an hour, set down her book and joined in. By the time the trolley came past with sweets, the 3 of them were on the kind of negotiated armistice that occurs between children at the start of a school year. By the time the train was somewhere north of Crewe, Hermione had decided, on her own evidence, that the boy was less dangerous than the books in her satchel had suggested, and the red-haired boy had decided, on no evidence at all, that the boy was a brilliant fellow and a credit to the carriage. The boy permitted both decisions without amendment. He thought, behind his face, that he had acquired, in the course of one train journey, the first 2 friends of his life, of whom one was a clever girl who had been brave, and one was a careless boy who had not realized he had needed to be. He thought also that Seers would be pleased. They arrived in the dark. A great half-giant called Hagrid took the first years across a black lake in a small boat. The castle came up out of the water and was not, the boy thought, displeasing. It was, in its way, the same kind of building as the manor, an old thing put up in the assumption that it would last, an old thing that had decided, on its own time, what it would and would not permit. He approved of it as a building. He reserved his approval of it as a school until he had seen the staff. The staff he saw at the high table half an hour later, after the sorting hat. The hat had been an item of mild surprise. The hat had been put on his head and had said, quietly, into his ear, that it had not previously been asked to sort a candidate of his particular composition, and that the experience was, for the hat, an unusual one. The hat had spent rather longer on him than on any of the other first years. In the end, after a small private negotiation in which the boy had stated his preferences with the polite firmness of a young officer addressing a board, the hat had pronounced him a Slytherin, on the grounds that the Slytherins were the only one of the 4 houses who, in the hat's opinion, would not actively annoy him over the course of the year. The hat had also said, with the tone of a slightly resigned bureaucrat, that there had been a complicating piece of someone else's soul in the boy's head when he had been a baby, and that it was no longer there, and that he was therefore sorted on his own merits, of which there were considerable. The boy had thanked the hat. The hat had said quietly, "You are welcome, child," and had been taken off, and he had walked across the hall to the green-trimmed table on the far side, where the Slytherins had received him with the cautious respect of a regiment receiving a new officer whose name was familiar from dispatches, the high table. He sat down at the Slytherin table and looked across the hall the way one looks across a chessboard. The high table had a dozen masters and one mistress in robes of various colors. The boy went down the line and made a brief private assessment of each one, in the manner of an officer attending a parade and totting up which of the men under inspection would, if asked to fix a bayonet, fix it correctly the first time. He stopped at one of them. A tall, thin master with black hair, black robes, black eyes. The master was not, when he reached him, looking at the dish in front of him. The master was looking very precisely at the boy across the hall. The boy returned the look. They held the look for perhaps 8 seconds. There was no challenge in it on either side. There was, the boy thought, the recognition of one man with a quiet trade for another. The black-eyed master inclined his head, the smallest possible inclination, and went back to his dish. The boy inclined his head in reply, the smallest possible inclination, and went back to his soup. Hermione, at her own table, had not seen the exchange. Ron, at his, had not. The headmaster, at the high table, had seen everything and had registered, the boy thought, that the trained predator in the room had been recognized by the master in black, and had elected, by the very small absence of remark on the matter, to let the matter rest. Lessons began on the Monday. The black-eyed master's lessons were called potions. The black-eyed master swept into the dungeon on the first Monday and gave a brief sharp speech about the bottling of fame and the corking of glory, and asked 4 questions in the course of his speech, and his eyes, which had not turned to the boy at the start of the speech, turned to him at the 3rd question, and the question was, "Mr. Potter, where would I look if I wished to find a bezoar?" The boy stood, "In the stomach of a goat, sir." "And what is a bezoar's purpose?" "It is an antidote to most ordinary poisons, sir." "It is not a reliable antidote to the strong magical poisons, in particular those derived from the heart of a basilisk or the venom of the larger Asian worms." "And how do you come to know this, Mr. Potter?" "From the household library at my guardian's house, sir, which contains a 1923 edition of Pertwee's Encyclopedia of Magical Antidotes. I read it at the age of 8. "Sit down, Mr. Potter." He sat. The black-eyed master gave no sign. The black-eyed master moved on with the lesson. The boy understood, with the quiet pleasure of a small private victory, that he had passed a test the rest of the class had not been aware was being administered. At the end of the lesson, the black-eyed master, in the act of passing his bench, paused for the half-second it took him to murmur, in the lowest register the room would carry, "I do not require contractions in this classroom, Mr. Potter. I do not use them. I assume you do not use them. Confirm." "Confirmed, Professor. Continue." The black-eyed master swept out. They did not, in the course of the term, exchange another word longer than 3 sentences. They did not, on either side, require to. Each had in the other the silent presence of a fellow technician. The headmaster, at the high table, watched. The headmaster invited the boy to his office on the 2nd Sunday. The boy presented himself at the gargoyle at the appointed hour. The gargoyle leaped aside. The boy ascended the moving stairs. The boy entered the office. The headmaster, behind a desk crowded with silver instruments and small whirring objects, smiled the kindly smile of a grandfather with a great deal to say and not enough afternoons to say it in. "Harry, my boy, tea." "Thank you, headmaster. I will accept a cup." "Lemon drop." "Thank you, headmaster. I will not." The headmaster spoke, gently, for half an hour. He spoke of friendship and of the importance of friendship to a young man at the start of his school career. He spoke of the curious fame the boy had thrust upon him by accident of birth. He spoke of a prophecy of which the boy had been told. He spoke, with mild persuasion, of the desirability of the boy's transferring out of Sir Integra's care and into the school's pastoral arrangements, by which the headmaster meant his own. The boy drank his tea. The boy listened. The boy did not, throughout the half-hour, speak. At the end of it, the headmaster paused expectantly. "Headmaster, Harry, I have a written instruction from my guardian regarding this conversation. I have been authorized to read it to you. May I? Of course, my boy. He produced a small folded note from the inside pocket of his blazer. The note was in Sir Integra's hand. He read it aloud. To the headmaster, the boy is not for transfer. The boy will not be subjected to private pastoral interviews of the kind familiar from your customs and unfamiliar from ours. Should you wish to speak to my asset, you may speak to him in writing, with a copy delivered to me by post on the 1st of the following month. Failure to observe this protocol will be regarded as a breach of the agreement of the 1st of August, and the agreement is, as the headmaster will recall, conditioned on observance of every clause. Yours, Integra Fairbrook, Wingates, Hellsing. The headmaster received this, gently, and nodded. He twinkled mildly. He said, "Of course, my boy." The boy folded the note. The boy returned the note to his pocket. The boy stood. The boy said, "Thank you for the tea, headmaster," and bowed and left, and the headmaster watched him go with the small frown of a man who had laid out his pieces with care and discovered, on the second move, that the opposing pieces had been carved in a different city. There were no further pastoral interviews. Halloween was the troll. The boy was in the dungeon when the news came that a troll had been admitted to the lower corridors. He had been on the way back from potions. He had passed Hermione in the corridor outside the girls' lavatory and had noticed, with the small, careful attention he had been trained to pay to all civilians under his eye, that she had been crying about something. He had not asked. He had been concerned with the rule against asking. He had set down his bag at the doorway of the lavatory and said very politely, "Hermione, I am required to attend to an animal in the corridor. Will you remain in the lavatory until I return?" "What animal?" "A troll, I believe. There has been a notice. Please remain." She had remained. He had not run. He had walked. He had walked the way Walter had taught him to walk in a corridor where the relevant question was where the corner was. He had found the troll at the third corner. The troll had been 12 feet high. The boy had looked up at the troll. "Good evening, sir." The troll had not replied. "Sir, you are in a school in which there are unarmed children. You will not, this evening, eat any of them. Please return to the place from which you have come." The troll had not understood the words. The troll had understood that the small thing in front of it was the kind of small thing it would, on the open moor, have rolled over and licked at to see whether it was good to eat. The troll had raised its club. The wire had come out of the boy's sleeve in the gesture Walter had taught him 2 years ago on the back lawn of the manor in a cold March wind. The wire had crossed the corridor at the level of the troll's throat. The boy had stepped sideways at the same instant, because Walter had taught him that the kindness one offered the troll was to make it unnecessary for the troll to see the rest of itself in motion. The wire had completed its work in the manner of a wire that has done its work many times before, and the troll had stood for a moment, surprised, and had then settled by degrees into the wreckage that a creature of its size made when it had been informed by its tendons that it was no longer required to stand. The boy had wiped the wire. The boy had returned the wire to his sleeve. The boy had walked back to the lavatory. The boy had said, "Hermione, the corridor is clear. Please proceed." She had proceeded. She had looked in passing at the wreckage in the corridor. She had not, the boy noticed, fainted. She had nodded once at him in the brief, steady manner of a girl who had decided to be loyal to someone she did not entirely understand. They had walked together to the great hall, where the headmaster had been making a speech about staff sweeps and the security of corridors, and Professor McGonagall, on the second tier of the high table, had seen them come in and had given the boy the precise long look he had received before from people who had read a dispatch, but had not yet had time to file it. "Mr. Potter, Professor, I am told there has been an incident in the second-floor corridor." "Yes, Professor." "Did you have anything to do with it?" "Yes, Professor. My office. After dinner, please." "Yes, Professor." He went to her office after dinner. He told her what had happened. he told her without embellishment. She listened, the way the black-eyed master had listened at the high table, and at the end of his account she nodded once and she said, "Mr. Potter, Professor, you will, in future, when there is a troll in this castle, alert a member of staff. You will not, in future, dispatch trolls without a member of staff present. Yes, Professor, you will not, in this castle, garrot human beings. I should not have to put this in a sentence, but I am putting it in a sentence. Yes, Professor, you may go. Thank you, Professor," he went. He went back to his dormitory. He sat on his bed, and he composed a brief letter to Sir Integra and a brief letter to the master, and he sealed both letters in 2 envelopes which he put into the school post on the Monday. And on the Tuesday, Sir Integra wrote back, briefly, that she approved of the technique, that she did not approve of the lack of clearance, and that she expected him to alert a member of staff next time. The master did not write back. The master never wrote back. The master, the boy understood, regarded letters as a courtesy of the living. Then there was quarrel. There was, in the corridor outside the defense classroom, a smell that the boy had not smelled before in the castle, and that he had smelled twice at the manor in the south cellar, where Dr. Trevelyan kept the small jars of things the organization had taken off persons in the field. The smell was the smell of necromantic taint. The smell was the smell of a piece of a person who had been hidden inside another person. It was not the same fragment that had been in the boy's own forehead at 7. It was a related fragment. The boy understood, on the 3rd day of feeling it in the corridor, that the tapeworm had a brother. He wrote to the manor. The manor wrote back. The manor's letter was on heavy paper, and it was in Sir Integra's hand, and it said to the asset, "The Bureau has had a sister fragment of the tapeworm on file since 1989. The fragment was lodged in a tutor known to your school under the name Quirinus Quirrell. Your school's headmaster is, as you know from the Bureau's file, aware of the fragment's presence in his staff, and has elected, for reasons of his own which he has not seen fit to share, to permit the tutor to remain in his post for the present term, in order, the Bureau infers, to permit the fragment to make a move which the headmaster has been waiting for since the start of term. Do not disturb the fragment without my written authorization. IFWH, the boy did not disturb the fragment. He observed it. He observed it through the autumn. He observed it through the first frost. He observed it, with the quiet attention of a junior officer keeping a bureau file from across a defense classroom, while the fragment, in its tutor, taught a curriculum so manifestly evasive that the Slytherins had begun, by the second half of term, to mark defense on their timetables in pencil. Then, on the 4th of November, the recall came. The recall was a small folded note slipped into the boy's pigeonhole in the Slytherin common room by a member of the school's owl service. The note was in Walter's hand. It said, "Operational. Recall to the manor by the 8 o'clock train tonight from Hogsmeade. The master will collect you at Euston. Bring nothing of schools. Sir Integra has approved a 48-hour absence from the school's roster on operational grounds, vied the agreement of the 1st of August. He read the note. He folded the note. He put the note into the inside pocket of his blazer. He went to Professor McGonagall's office and presented the note, and she read it, and she nodded, and she said, "Very well, Mr. Potter. I will inform your housemaster. Please be in Hogsmeade at 7:30. Yes, Professor, he was. The train south was empty. He sat by the window. He drank from his folding flask at intervals which had been set by Dr. Trevelyan and had not, since the manor, been varied. He arrived at Euston at 4 minutes past midnight. The man in the red coat was waiting on the platform. My fledgling, master, you have been observed by your school's headmaster as you boarded. I will absent us from his observation now. Take my hand." "Yes, master." He took the hand. The platform changed. The platform was not, in any way that a porter would have agreed to, a platform any longer. Then the platform was a long lawn under a low moon, and the manor stood at the end of the lawn, and Walter waited at the south door with the engine running on the Bentley, and Sears waited in the passenger seat with her rifle on her lap and her hair pinned up under a black beret. Right then. "Brother, Sears, get in. Tell you on the way." He got in. She told him on the way there had been a freelance freak cell on the south coast which the Bureau had been monitoring since the summer. The cell had, on the evening of the 4th, broken cover and had attempted a feeding raid on a village in Surrey within 30 miles of the manor. The village had not been one of the Bureau's pre-cleared evacuation sites. The cell had, by the time the Bureau's local stringer had reported the raid, killed 11 civilians and was holding a further 43 in the village hall as a feeding pool. The manor had been activated within 20 minutes of the stringer's report. Sir Integra had cleared lethal force at her own desk. Walter had brought the car around. Sears had reported from the firing range. The master had risen out of the south cellar in the precise garments in which he was now sitting in the back seat. The boy had been recalled because Sir Integra had decided, with the cold practicality of a woman running a long campaign, that the cell would be useful experience, and that the cell was unlikely to survive the engagement long enough to be useful experience to anyone else. They reached the village at 20 to 2. The village hall stood at the far end of a green. The pews of the village hall had been pushed aside. The 43 civilians were arranged on the floor in 2 long lines under the watch of 6 standing figures and 2 lieutenants of a kind which were not, on the Bureau's books, persons in any meaningful sense. The cell's leader stood at the lectern in the manner of a guest preacher addressing a parish he had decided was his. The man in the red coat walked into the hall. He did not knock. The double doors of the hall, which had been latched, were no longer latched at his approach. "Good evening," he said, with the small theatrical pleasantness of a man arriving at a long-anticipated dinner. The cell's leader looked up. The cell's leader had been a freelance vampire of some standing in his own circle. He had not, in his own circle, encountered the man in the red coat. The cell's leader registered, in the small, uncomfortable manner of a senior banker, discovering that the auditor in front of him is older and richer than he had assumed, that his evening had been complicated. The civilians looked across the hall. The police boy stepped in behind the master, with Sears at his right shoulder and Walter at the rear. The police boy carried no rifle. The police boy had been instructed, on the drive south, that this engagement was to be the master's exercise, and that the police boy's role was to receive the leader's lieutenants when the master had reduced the cell to its leader. Sears carried her long Harkonnen rifle and a smaller pistol on the hip. Walter had his wires. The cell's leader said, "I do not know you, sir." "That is correct. Who are you, sir?" "I am the no-life king." "I will require to know more than that, sir." "I doubt that you will, sir." "You will not, on the available evidence, live long enough." The cell's leader produced a long, curved saber from beneath his coat and rushed the master. He did not arrive. He did not arrive in the sense that, halfway across the hall, between one breath of the watching civilians and the next, the cell's leader had been removed from the air. There was no spectacle to the removal. The removal was the simple absence of a man between one heartbeat of the village hall clock and the next, and a small spreading of fine grey dust on the floorboards where he had been standing, and the master had not, during the removal, moved. The master had not even quite shifted his weight. The 6 standing figures fired. The police boy moved. He moved the way he had been taught to move. The wire came out of his left sleeve and was already across the room before he was. The first standing figure lost its head. The second lost its right arm and the rifle in the right arm. The third loosed a bolt at the master that did not, by some private decision of the bolt, complete its trajectory. The fourth opened its mouth to speak and was, with the soft rustle of dust on wood, no longer present. The fifth and the sixth turned and made the small late attempt at retreat, which is the universal property of cells whose leaders have just been folded out of the room. Sears's Harkonnen broke the larger window at the rear of the hall on the way out of the muzzle. The fifth fell. The sixth fell. The two lieutenants moved. They moved very fast. They had been bred specifically for the moving. They came at the boy in the manner of two trained dogs who had been ordered to take a child. And the boy understood, in the half-second before the lieutenants reached him, that the master had ceded the lieutenants to him on purpose. In order to test the question of how he handled the kind of opponent the Manor's training drills had not been able to simulate. He answered the question. The first lieutenant took a wire across the throat and a knife from the boy's right hand under the sternum. The second lieutenant, larger and slightly faster, had time to put a hand on the boy's shoulder before the boy moved his elbow. And the boy moved his elbow into the lieutenant's jaw, and the lieutenant's jaw became fractionally separate from the rest of the lieutenant. The boy walked the lieutenant backwards into the wall of the hall with the casual leverage of a much larger man, and applied the second knife to the place where it would do the most permanent work, and the lieutenant settled by degrees into a heap which the master regarded across the hall with a small private smile of pride. Police boy, master, you have grown. Yes, master. Police girl, master. Walter, master. Stand them down, reassure the civilians. Tell them they have been the guests of an organization they have not been permitted to be told about. Tell them they will not, in the morning, remember any of this. Dr. Trevelyan will be along within the hour. Master. The civilians were stood down. The civilians were reassured. The civilians were, in the manner of all civilians the organization had handled, escorted into a small adjoining room where Dr. Trevelyan administered, by gentle injection, the regulated forgetfulness that the Bureau preferred to the cruder oblivion charms favored by other authorities. The boy stood at the master's elbow and observed the procedure without comment. He had been instructed throughout to observe. At the end of it, the master turned to him. My fledgling, master, there was a presence in this hall tonight which I did not invite. Master, it was not in the air. It was not in the floor. It was in the leader's mouth when he raised it to speak to me. It was, my fledgling, a fragment of the same tapeworm whose elder brother is in your school. It has been listening to me from the leader's mouth for the entirety of the evening. It has now, by the brief failure of the leader, learned of our existence. It will in due course attend to us. You will in due course attend to it. Do you understand? Yes, master. You will return to your school at dawn. I require you to dispatch the elder brother in the school within 7 days of your return. The headmaster will not stand in your way. The headmaster has been informed, by a brief letter delivered to him at midnight, that the time of polite waiting has come to an end. Are you clear on your orders? Yes, master. Good, police girl, master. Walk the boy to the car. Walter will drive him to Euston. I will join you for breakfast at the Manor on Sunday. Master, they drove him to Euston. He boarded the 7:20 North. He slept against the window. He woke at York. He drank from the flask. He arrived at Hogsmeade at 3:30. He walked up to the castle. The sun was as he walked at his back. The sun was as it rose on his shoulders. The sun did not, this morning, hurt. He noticed the change without comment, the way one notices the absence of a small chronic ache one has carried for years. In the great hall at breakfast, he poured himself a cup of tea and let the rising light come in through the eastern windows at his neck. The bacon was hot. The light was hot. Neither hurt. He understood, with the quiet pleasure of an officer ticking off a stage of his own training, that his master's bloodline had, somewhere in the last 4 years, finished its slow tally inside him, and that he was, with regard to daylight, finally a man of the trade. Hermione, across the bench, looked at him over her own tea. Harry, Hermione, you're different this morning. Yes. Is it a good different? Yes, good. The 7th day was the 3rd-floor corridor. He had been instructed not to be observed entering it. He had not been observed. He had taken the back stair from the dungeon at 8:20 in the evening, in the small, still hour between dinner and curfew, when the prefects were elsewhere. and he had moved along the south wall with the quietness Walter had taught him. And he had stopped at the third-floor corridor at the appointed minute. The door was open. The fragment had been waiting. The tutor was alone. He was alone in the small, careful sense that a man with a tapeworm in his skull is alone. The boy could smell the second presence behind the turban as clearly as he had smelled it across the defense classroom, and the second presence could smell him in return. "Mr. Potter, Professor. You have come." "Yes, sir." The voice from behind the turban was the small, dry voice of a thing speaking through a tube. It was not, the boy thought, an unintelligent voice. It was a voice that had, in its long evening of being a tapeworm and a tutor, retained considerable presence of mind. "Boy." "Sir, you and I have unfinished business." "No, sir, we do not. You and I have no business at all. You are an animal, I am the gardener. Please remain still." "Boy." "Yes, sir, you will not strike a teacher." "Sir, I will not be striking a teacher. I will be disposing of an animal which has lodged itself in the skull of a teacher, after which I will be returning the teacher's body to my mistress's medical staff for the dignified processing which the teacher's family will wish to be told of. The teacher will not, on the available evidence, have survived the lodging. That is no longer your concern. Please remain still." "Boy, kill him." "Sir, I am the gardener." The wire moved before the tutor's hand did. It was a clean cut. It was the cleanest cut the boy had ever made. Walter, watching the recording at the manor on the following Tuesday, would say, with the brisk approval of a man inspecting a length of dressmaking lace, that it had been the most competent garroting of his career. The tutor's head separated. The fragment in the turban, freed of the tutor and frantic, attempted to leap. It did not arrive. The boy had a small silver flask in his left hand at the level of his collarbone with the lid off, and he raised the flask, and the fragment, against its own intention, was drawn into the flask in the manner of a moth drawn into a bell jar, and the boy capped the flask. And the fragment was contained. He returned the flask to the inside pocket of his blazer. He took out a small silver square the size of a calling card. He placed the card on the corridor floor beside the tutor's body. He stepped back 2 paces. He spoke a single word in Latin, which Madame Petruska had taught him 3 years ago, against a day on which he might be required to use it. The card flared twice, and the body in front of him was, between the flares, reduced to a clean line of ash on the corridor floor. He did not wait for the ash to settle. He gathered it in his pocket handkerchief, folded the handkerchief, returned the handkerchief to his pocket, and walked back along the corridor in the way he had walked along it, at the quiet, patient pace of a junior officer who had, in the course of a single Tuesday evening, brought a long bureau file to a close. In the headmaster's office, an hour later, he placed the folded handkerchief on the desk. "Headmaster. Harry, the body has been processed in accordance with my mistress's protocols. The ash is the ash. The fragment is in a flask in my pocket. The flask will travel south on the Sunday train. The bureau has been informed by Owl of the conclusion of the operation. I am required to ask, on my mistress's behalf, whether the school wishes to issue a public statement on the dismissal of the defense tutor, or whether the school wishes the Bureau to issue a routine notice of resignation on behalf of the defense tutor's family. Please advise." The headmaster looked at him over the half-moon spectacles. The twinkle had gone out of the eyes some weeks before. The twinkle did not return. The headmaster sat very still for some seconds. Then he said, gently, "The school will issue a routine notice, Mr. Potter. Please convey my thanks to Sir Integra for the timely completion of the operation." "I shall, headmaster." "Harry, headmaster, will you be staying at the school for the remainder of the year?" "Yes, headmaster. My mistress's protocols are that I complete the academic year as agreed." "I shall do so. Then I would be glad of your continued presence." "Thank you, headmaster." He bowed. He left. He walked down the moving staircase. He walked along the corridor. The corridor smelled, after 7 days, no longer of necromancy. The boy noted the absence of the smell the way a sentry notes the absence of fog. He went down to dinner. He sat at the green table. He ate, lightly, the dish that had been set in front of him. The black-eyed master, at the high table, looked at him once, briefly, and inclined his head a fraction, and the boy inclined his head a fraction in return, and the master went back to his soup, and the boy went back to his bread, and the wider hall did not, at any point in the evening, understand what had passed between the two of them. In a cellar 140 miles south, in a country house with 12 bays and a rose garden, a flask was unwrapped at midnight by a man in a red coat, and the fragment inside the flask was placed, with small theatrical care, into a glass jar already housing the elder fragment that had been in the boy's forehead at 7, and the two fragments, reunited at last, swam against the glass and screamed in a voice no one else in the house could hear. And the man in the red coat smiled the small smile he had not yet bothered to share with anyone else, and put the jar back on the shelf where it would wait, patiently, for the other fragments to be brought to it. He looked up once at the ceiling of the cellar in the direction of the moon over Scotland, where his fledgling had gone back to his dormitory after a long Tuesday's work and had fallen asleep on the second-best pillow, like the boy of 11 he in some technical sense still was. "Sleep well, my apprentice." The voice was very quiet. It did not, by any reasonable measure, carry to Scotland. The police boy, asleep in his dormitory, heard it anyway and turned a little further into the pillow and did not wake. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. A triwizard in charcoal 3-piece 3 years passed at the school in the way years pass on a long campaign. In a register of small entries that did not, taken individually, signify, and which together composed the kind of file the Bureau described under the heading Asset, Progressing. He was 14. He stood at the standard officer's height for a boy of his year and his sex. He wore the school's robes only when the school's robes were operationally required, by which the manner meant in the great hall at meals and in the lessons of those instructors who had requested them in writing. The rest of the time, the boy wore a charcoal 3-piece in a cut Walter had ordered from Jermyn Street for his 13th birthday and which the kitchen had been retailoring twice a year since. He had grown into his face. He no longer wore the round spectacles. He had asked Walter, on his 13th, whether he might be permitted to retire the spectacles, on the grounds that they had become a habit rather than a courtesy, and Walter had said, with the dignity of a butler conceding a small change in tradition, that the manor would be quite content if he retired them, and the boy had accordingly retired them, and his eyes, which were the color of cold stained glass at a winter window, had been more visible to his correspondents since. He had Hermione. He had Ron. He had Cedric Diggory, of Hufflepuff, who had taken him aside at the start of the 3rd year and proposed a treaty between them on the principle that the school was, in operational terms, a country which the two of them had to share, and that mutual courtesy between the two of them would save the country a great deal of small, unnecessary trouble. Cedric Diggory was tall, fair, decent, and, Walter had said upon being shown a photograph at the end of the 3rd year, an officer one would have been pleased to have under one's command, although in this case, the country he proposed to officer was not on the Bureau's books. Eligible to receive officers, the boy had liked him. Cedric had liked the boy, their treaty had held. He had Draco Malfoy in his own house, with whom relations were correct rather than warm, and 3 other Slytherins of his year with whom relations were warm rather than correct, and a small reputation in the wider school of being the polite, quiet boy in the corner of the great hall who, if asked, would help one carry one's books up to the 4th floor, and who, if not asked, would not. He had been seen, in the 3rd year, to take an injured prefect down to the hospital wing on his shoulder, when no one else had been willing to admit they had been the cause of the injury, and he had been seen, in the same week, to garrote a wraith in the corridor outside the Charms classroom, with the small, expressionless competence of a man pulling a weed in his own kitchen garden. The school, taken broadly, had decided to be proud of him. The headmaster, at the high table, had registered the pride. The headmaster, at the high table, had also registered the 4-year file of small mute correspondences the boy had had with the master in black at his end of the table, and the small mute correspondence the boy had had on Saturdays with Sir Integra's owl, who arrived at exactly 9 each morning with the post that had not, for reasons of operational hygiene, been entrusted to the wider Royal Mail. The headmaster had been gracious in the matter of the asset, on the boy's terms. Ever since the night, the third-floor corridor had been left as a clean line of ash on flagstones, and a folded handkerchief had appeared on his own desk. He had not, in 3 years, asked the boy to lemon drops again. Then the Triwizard happened. The Triwizard was unforeseen by the agreement of the 1st of August. It had not, on the file, been on the school's calendar, and the headmaster had said as much on a Tuesday morning in the 2nd week of term, when a long letter had arrived at the manor in the hand of his green ink, and Sir Integra had read the letter twice, and Sir Integra had not been pleased. And Sir Integra had taken the train to King's Cross herself on the Friday following. She had arrived at Hogsmeade on the 4 o'clock that Friday in a 3-piece of dove grey with a green cravat and the kind of black wool overcoat that had been cut for her father in 1949. Walter had attended her. Walter had a black umbrella against the soft rain that had been falling on the Highlands since lunch. They had walked up to the castle from the village in the manner of 2 officers visiting a base they had not previously found cause to inspect. The headmaster had received them in his office. The boy had attended on Sir Integra's left shoulder in the second-best charcoal with his hands at his sides. Headmaster, Sir Integra, the clause, Sir Integra, the tournament is a hosted event. The school is required, by the terms of its charter with the other 2 institutions, to provide a champion. It is not, in this iteration, required to provide a champion under the age of 17. And yet, in the iterations on record, that requirement has not prevented the tournament from producing a champion under that age. Sir Integra, I had hoped to inform you that the tournament had been put on the school's calendar in the spring. The tournament was, in fact, put on the school's calendar last Tuesday. I had no information of it before then. Headmaster, Sir Integra, you are an institution, I am an officer. Institutions are convened by their charters. Officers are bound by their files. Our agreement was the file. Our agreement specified that the boy would not be entered in the tournament should one be convened during his attendance at the school. Our agreement is operative. I expect it to be observed. Sir Integra. Yes, Headmaster. The Goblet of Fire is, by its own charter, a binding magical instrument. If, by accident or design, the boy's name is placed in the goblet, the boy will be bound. The boy will not be bound by an instrument his guardian has not consented to. The Bureau has been making me a file on the goblet since Tuesday. The Bureau's file gives me 3 separate procedural exceptions under which the goblet's binding may be set aside, all 3 of which require the boy's guardian to declare, in writing, that the boy's binding is contrary to a prior charter under which the boy is presently bound. I am presently bound on prior charter. I will make the declaration in writing on the morning of the binding, should the binding occur. Sir Integra, I appreciate the precision of your file. I expect you to. Sir Integra. Yes. I would request, with respect, that we negotiate the eventuality before the binding occurs, rather than after. Negotiate. Some accommodation by which, if the boy is bound, the school and the organization may discharge the binding to mutual satisfaction. She looked at him the way she had looked at him on the front steps of the manor 3 years ago. She looked at her cigarette. She looked at him again. Walter, madam, tea, madam, and bring a chair. The headmaster will be sitting at his desk. I shall be standing. Walter brought the tea. They sat, the headmaster, and stood, the woman in dove grey, and the boy attended on her left shoulder in the second-best charcoal, and they negotiated for an hour. By the end of the hour, the terms had been agreed. Should the boy's name come out of the goblet, the binding would be permitted to take effect, on condition that the boy would be deployed throughout the tournament under the formal designation of an organization field asset on temporary loan to the school's competition roster. That the boy's protocols would not be subordinated in any task to the school's task scoring. That the boy would be permitted at any time to be withdrawn from the tournament by Sir Integra's written declaration on operational grounds, and that the boy would, in each of the 3 tasks, be observed by an organization officer on the ground, who would intervene if intervention proved operationally required, in which case the binding's penalties would be incurred by the organization on the boy's behalf. On the further condition that the school would pay the penalties in cash should the organization decide in any iteration to claim them, Sir Integra signed. The headmaster signed. Walter put the agreement in his pocket. Then Sir Integra turned to the boy. Boy, madam, you will be in the tournament. You will treat it as an operational deployment. You will not, during the tournament, embarrass us. You will not, during the tournament, treat the other champions as competition. They are colleagues from cooperating jurisdictions. You will be courteous to them. You will eat with them when they invite you to, and you will train with them when they invite you to, and you will not, under any provocation, allow the school's housemasters to set you against them. You will, throughout, conduct yourself in the manner of an officer in the field on temporary attachment to a foreign command. Do you understand? Yes, madam, servant, mistress. You will, on the night of the binding, be in this office, in your second-best coat, without the hat, with the hat under your arm. You will stand at my right shoulder while the binding takes effect. You will not, during the binding, smile. The headmaster does not, on the available evidence, enjoy the smile. Mistress, boy, madam, go to your dormitory. Get a good night's sleep. The goblet ceremony is on the Tuesday following. You will attend it in the standard school robes for the headmaster's sake. I shall be there. The master will be there. Miss Victoria will not be there because Miss Victoria is on a separate operation in Inverness this week. You will conduct yourself. Yes, madam, he bowed. He left. He walked back to the dungeon. He sat at the Slytherin table at breakfast on the Tuesday and ate his bread and did not, when his housemates asked him whether he had heard the rumors about the binding, comment. The goblet ceremony took place on the Tuesday at 7:30 in the evening, after dinner. The goblet stood in the center of the great hall on a small carved plinth that the school's caretaker had brought up from the cellar. The headmaster invited the candidates to enter their names. They did. The goblet flared blue. Cedric Diggory's name came out, then Victor Crumb's. Then Fleur de Lacquer's. Then the headmaster's smile faltered. The goblet flared a 4th time. A 4th slip of parchment ascended from the brim and floated in the air. The headmaster reached for it. He looked at it. He read it. He read it again. He looked, with the careful expression of a man who has been refusing to acknowledge a recurring nightmare for 3 months, at the dove-grey woman who had just risen from her place at the staff table. Sir Integra. Yes, headmaster. The slip says Harry Potter. I am aware. Sir Integra, I shall, in accordance with our agreement of last Friday, accept the binding on operational terms. Boy, madam, come forward. He came forward. He stood at the foot of the goblet's plinth in the standard school robes, which he had been wearing at her express request, and he looked, very briefly, across the hall at the high table, where the master in black sat with his hands folded under his sleeves, and observed the proceedings with the small fractional movement of his head that meant, in the language of his side of their correspondence, that he had registered the move and was not, in any particular way, surprised by it. Mr. Potter, said the headmaster, you have been bound by the goblet of fire to compete in the tournament. Do you accept the binding? On operational terms, headmaster, as agreed. You accept. I accept. The goblet flared a fifth time and went quiet. The hall, which had been quiet, came back into a low murmur. Across the room, at the Hufflepuff table, Cedric Diggory caught the boy's eye and gave him, with the small private nod of one officer to another, the gesture of a man saying, "Well, here we are," and the boy returned the gesture, and the hall, having registered that the new fourth champion was not on examination, going to make a scene, settled, Sir Integra walked out of the hall without further comment. The man in the red coat, who had not been seen at the staff table during the ceremony, was no longer in the room. The boy returned to his place at the Slytherin table. He finished his bread. Hermione caught his eye from the Gryffindor table. He inclined his head 1/8 of an inch to her. She inclined hers 1/8 of an inch in reply. Ron, beside her, looked at him for the long second of a boy realizing that his friend had, in the space of 2 minutes, been promoted out of the social bracket of 14-year-olds and into the unspecified bracket of senior officers, and the boy, knowing the look from a distance of 3 years, gave Ron the same small private nod he had given Cedric, and Ron, whose loyalty was without complications, gave it back. The first task was the dragons. The Bureau's file on dragons, which the master had recited to the boy from memory in the South Study 3 nights before the task, had been 6 paragraphs long. The first paragraph had said, "Dragons are pre-modern animals. They obey pre-modern logic. They will attack a stationary opponent. They will not attack an opponent who declines to be opposite." The second paragraph had said, "The dragon's eyes are positioned for binocular forward vision. The dragon does not look at the ground 3 feet from its own snout." The third paragraph had said, "The dragon's hearing is sensitive in the lower register and insensitive in the upper register. A whistle pitched at 15 kilohertz will sit in the dragon's blind spot." The fourth, fifth, and sixth paragraphs had been about wing kinetics and were not, for the purposes of the task, operationally necessary. The boy went into the tent on the morning of the first task in the charcoal 3-piece. He had been told by the school that he was permitted his school robes. He had elected not to be in them. He had a small length of monomolecular wire in his left sleeve and a 15 kilohertz whistle around his neck on a silver chain, and a school broom in his right hand on the grounds that the broom was the equipment the school had asked him to bring, and the school had asked him to bring it. And he had brought it. He drew the Hungarian horntail out of the bag the headmaster brought round to the 4 champions in the tent. He nodded politely to Cedric, who drew the Swedish short snout next, and to Victor, who drew the Chinese fireball, and to Fleur, who drew the Welsh green. Each of the others looked at him with the steady cordiality of fellow officers on a job. He returned the look. The horn went. He stepped out into the arena. The horntail was at the far end. The horntail was, on the file's terms, a magnificent example of its species. The boy raised the whistle to his lips and blew. The whistle was not, by any audible measure, a sound. The horntail flinched very slightly. The boy stepped forward 2 paces. The horntail, oriented now in the lower register on a position the boy was no longer at, made the small, irritated movement of a large animal which has been bitten by a fly it cannot find. The boy stepped forward 5 more paces. The horntail looked, vaguely, at where he had been 3 seconds before, and rumbled. The boy walked the rest of the way across the arena at the unhurried pace of a junior officer walking to the staff car after a meeting. He stopped at the foot of the horntail's nest. He bent. He picked up the gold egg. He turned. He walked back across the arena at the same unhurried pace. The horntail, 3 feet over his head, looked in entirely the wrong direction and rumbled at a coach 100 yards away who had not been there to begin with. He arrived back at the tent. The crowd, which had begun the task with the customary nervousness of a crowd presented with a 14-year-old in a charcoal 3-piece, ended the task in a stunned silence that the broadcaster on the bench was, on his commentary, having difficulty filling. Sir Integra was waiting at the tent entrance. "Boy," Madam. Time, 2 minutes 11 seconds, madam. Are you tired? No, madam. Hurt? No, madam. You did not use the broom. I did not, madam. The broom was equipment supplied by the school. It was not operationally required. HM. She inclined her head. She had brought with her a thermos. She poured a small measure from the thermos into a folding silver cup. He drank from the cup. He returned the cup. The crowd, which had been holding its tongue, found its tongue again, and the score appeared on the boards, and the score was the lowest the boy received in the tournament, because the judging body, which had been instructed in the previous fortnight on the school's protocol for fairness, had elected, by the casting vote of the judge from the ministry, to dock him heavily on the grounds that he had not, in their view, demonstrated wandwork. The boy did not mind. He had not been deployed under wandwork. Sir Integra did not mind, because Sir Integra had been there for the operation and not for the points. The boards changed. The next champion was called. He watched the next 3 champions go in. He noted, on the careful private register Walter had taught him to keep at all assessment events, which of them did what, and how, and where each of them might be vulnerable in a different operational theatre. Cedric came out of his task with a singed shoulder which Madame Pomfrey treated within the hour. Victor came out of his with 2 great long scratches up his right calf. Fleur came out of hers with her skirts scorched at the hem. The boy commiserated with each, briefly, in the dressing room, and Cedric, in particular, said, with the small grim humor of a man who had narrowly avoided becoming an unintentional appetizer, that he was inclined, in future tasks, to walk in the boy's footsteps, if at all possible. "You are welcome to," said the boy. "I shall walk slowly." "Right then," said Cedric, with the grin of an older brother, "slowly it is." The egg, in the bath, had given a brief subaquatic recital of a song in a language none of the 4 champions had heard before, and the song had translated when run past Madame Petriska in the south study at the manor over the Christmas leave, to a polite invitation to the lake on the 3rd day of February at 9:30 in the morning, with a note that an hour would be allowed for the recovery of certain articles of personal property from the deep. He had been at the manor over the leave for the standing fortnight. He had eaten Christmas dinner at the long pine table in the kitchen, with Walter at the head and Sears at his right, and the kitchen staff arranged on the benches in their best aprons, and the master had attended on the stroke of midnight in his red coat, and his hat with the brim turned up, and had recited, in Romanian, a long carol his grandmother had taught him in the 14th century, and the kitchen, which had not previously been familiar with the carol, had listened with the polite attention of a household receiving a guest's contribution. And the cook had brought out a plum cake afterwards, and the master had taken a slice with the small theatrical pleasure of a guest performing the courtesies he had performed for as long as anyone could remember. Then they had gone, all of them, to the south study for the briefing. The briefing had been on the lake. The briefing had been delivered by Sir Integra, in the dove grey, with the cigarette in the left glove burning in its careful column. Dr. Trevelyan had been there to confirm what the master had told the boy at the age of 9, that the boy's physiology no longer required oxygen at any pressure available on the British Isles, and that the boy was therefore, for the purposes of the lake task, an asset of unusual utility. Walter had said, with the diffidence of a butler offering a small private suggestion, that the boy might wear for the task the long oilskin coat the kitchen had been having quietly made for him over the autumn, on the grounds that the coat would, on emergence, allow the boy to shed water without ceremony and to present himself to the crowd in a condition the Bureau would not object to. The boy had said, with the equal diffidence of a junior officer, accepting a small private suggestion from his quartermaster, that he would be pleased to wear the coat. The boy returned to school in the first week of January. He attended his classes. He helped Hermione on a long essay for charms on the philosophy of incantation. He sat with Ron on the Saturday evenings in the common room of Slytherin, which Ron had been granted the Crosshouse leave to enter on the basis that Ron had spent 4 years coming in and out of it anyway, and the prefects had given up. He had, in the second week of January, a small private conversation with Cedric Diggory in the corridor outside the defense classroom, in which Cedric had told him, in a quiet, level voice, that the bath solution to the egg had given Cedric the lake also, and the boy had said, in the equally quiet, level voice, that the lake would not, in operational terms, be a difficulty for Cedric provided that Cedric undertook the standard preparations, and that if Cedric wished, the boy could, on the morning of the task, give him the precise route through the kelp to the merfolk that would shave 11 minutes off the swim. Cedric had thanked him. Cedric had taken the offer. The two of them, by the morning of the 3rd of February, had a quiet small agreement that the boy would go in, and that Cedric would follow in his wake, and that the two of them would emerge at the same time with their respective hostages, having behaved, throughout, in the manner of fellow officers on a job. The lake morning was cold. The lake morning was the kind of cold that arrived with frost on the reeds at the water's edge and a fine mist on the surface. The crowd assembled in the stands above the boathouse at 9:20. The boy walked down to the water's edge in the long oilskin coat, which the kitchen had quietly made for him over the autumn, and he removed the coat at the edge of the water, and he handed the coat to Walter, who had attended on Sir Integra in a black wool overcoat against the morning. And the boy was, beneath the coat, in a black wool diving shirt that the Bureau's costume department had cut for him over Christmas, and a pair of dark trousers that did not look out of place at any of the events at which he had been sent to appear. Boy, madam, hostage, Hermione, madam. The school has, on its own discretion, selected the person of greatest emotional attachment to the champion. I have advised the school that the term emotional attachment has not been explored with me in detail. The school has, on its own internal evidence, selected my closest classmate. HM. Is the classmate at any risk? Madam, the school has informed me in writing that the hostage is in stasis at the floor of the lake under merfolk supervision, and that the merfolk are, by treaty, accountable for the hostage's safe return. I have read the treaty. The treaty is satisfactory. The hostage is not at risk. HM, boy, madam, do not embarrass us. No, madam, he stepped off the bank. He did not swim. He walked. He walked down the underwater slope of the bank at the steady pace of a man crossing a station platform. The lake was very cold. The lake was very black. The lake was very full of things which had been told, the previous evening, by the merfolk's senior negotiator, to permit the 4 champions to pass and not to feed on any of them. The boy walked past the things in the manner of a man walking past stalls at an unfamiliar market, with the polite attention of a customer who was not, today, shopping. The things did not, on the available evidence, find him good to eat. The kelp, when he reached the kelp, opened politely for him in the way the door of the manor had opened politely for the master 8 years before in Privet Drive. He stepped through. He walked along the lake floor for the necessary minutes. He arrived at the merfolk village. Hermione was at the center of the village, tied to a stake of cold water reed. Cedric was, in his own swim, 4 minutes behind. The boy untied Hermione. He cut the cords with the small knife Walter had made him bring. He gathered Hermione under one arm in the polite manner of a man receiving a tutor's books to carry up from the library, and he turned, and he set out for the surface. And Cedric, who had arrived during the untying, took his own hostage, who was a small girl in Hufflepuff robes the boy did not recognize, and Cedric followed in the boy's wake, as they had agreed. They surfaced together. They surfaced precisely at minute 34, which the boy had calculated would put them within the head of the task's window, and which would not, on his calculation, embarrass the other 2 champions, who had been swimming under more conventional protocols. They came out of the water at the boathouse. Hermione coughed, Cedric's hostage coughed. The boy lifted Hermione onto the wooden boards of the boathouse, and Walter put the long oilskin coat across her shoulders, and Cedric did the same for his small girl with a coat the Hufflepuff housemaster had brought down to the water's edge. And the two of them stood on the boards together and exchanged the brief glance of two officers who had completed the operation to the satisfaction of the Bureau and the school. "Mr. Potter, Mr. Diggory, same again at the third task, same again at the third task," the crowd cheered. The other two champions came up at minute 41 and minute 46. The boards, which had been waiting for the casting vote of the ministry's judge to determine the scoring, were favorable on the operation and unfavorable on the timing, and the boy received a score that was, in his own private assessment, neither operationally objectionable nor operationally meaningful. He went up to the castle, he bathed, he dressed in the charcoal three-piece, he went down to lunch in the great hall, he sat at the Slytherin table, he ate his bread. The new defense master came up to him in the corridor outside the great hall after lunch. The new defense master had been on the staff since the start of term. He had a magical eye that the boy had been studying from the back of the defense classroom for 10 weeks. He had a wooden leg that had not, on close inspection, been carved for the leg it was attached to. He had a flask he kept on his belt that he drank from at intervals, which the boy had been keeping a private register of, and the register had told the boy, by the end of the third week, that the flask did not contain the beverage the new defense master claimed it contained. The new defense master, on the available evidence, was not the new defense master. He had been on the boy's private register for 10 weeks under the file note, Crouch B, Jr., confirmation pending, do not engage, Potter, Professor. Lake. Yes, Professor, good work. Thank you, Professor. You did not use a wand. I did not, Professor. The wand was not operationally required. The new defense master's good eye made the small flicker which the boy had been keeping a private register of since the start of term, and which the boy now understood, conclusively, to be the flicker of a man trained in the conventions of one organization responding to a courtesy from a member of another organization. The boy returned the flicker, very faintly. The new defense master nodded. The new defense master limped on past. The boy went back to his common room and wrote, in the small, careful hand he had been trained to write in, a one-line note to Sir Integra C. B. Jr. confirmed. Operational hygiene unchanged. Continuing to observe, he sealed the note. He sent the note by owl. Sir Integra wrote back, by the Monday's post, in 2 words, continue. IFWH, Sears came up to the castle on the Saturday after the lake task. Sears came in the long Bentley with Walter at the wheel and a leather holdall in the boot. Sears was, by the headmaster's leave under the agreement of the 1st of August, permitted on the grounds in her formal capacity as the Bureau's guardian of record over the boy's pastoral arrangements. She arrived at the front gates at 4. She walked up the gravel drive at the unhurried pace of an elder sister who had not seen her younger brother in 6 weeks and was inclined to take the long way up the lawn. He came out to meet her at the lawn, right then. Brother, Sears, show me round. He showed her round. He showed her the lake, at which the second task had been held. He showed her the south corridor where the defense classroom was. He showed her the kitchens, which the Hufflepuffs had quietly indicated to the rest of the school in the 3rd year that everybody was permitted in if everybody was polite. And the kitchen elves had given Sears and the boy a cup of black tea each at the corner table. And Sears had drunk her tea with the small private pleasure of a young woman who was, in her own house, the recipient of similar small private pleasures from a different kitchen staff. Then he had taken her up to the 7th floor, and they had walked along the corridor of the fat lady, who was in residence. And the fat lady had looked at Sears with the small startled interest of a portrait who had not previously been visited by a young woman with a holstered pistol under her coat. And the fat lady had said, very politely, "Good afternoon, miss," and Sears had said, "Good afternoon, ma'am." And they had passed. He had walked her down to the boathouse. He had walked her along the wood of the boathouse to the bench at the far end which looked out, in the gathering dusk, at the dark surface of the lake. They had sat there for some time. They had not throughout spoken. Sears had finally said, right then, "Brother." "Yes, Sears, you're growing up." "Yes, Sears. It's good you're growing up. I'm proud of you. Mr. Walter is proud of you. Sir Integra is proud of you in her own way, which is mostly by not saying that she's not. The Master is proud of you in his own way, which is mostly by not killing the people that have annoyed him about you." "Right, right, Sears. And brother?" "Yes, Sears. The next task is the dangerous one. The Bureau's file has it as the dangerous one. The other two were the warm-up. The next one is the one that ends the tournament." "Right, right, Sears. Don't get killed." "No, Sears. Or if you do, get killed in a way the Bureau can put back together. The Bureau has put me back together once. The Bureau can put you back together once. After that, it's letters in the drawer for the kitchen to read at Christmas." "Right, right, Sears. Good lad." She had put her arm round his shoulder. He had not flinched. He had not flinched at being touched in years. He had let her arm sit on his shoulder for a long, quiet minute. Then she had stood up. Then they had walked back up the lawn to the castle in the gathering dusk, and Walter had driven her south at 6, and the boy had returned to his dormitory, and the term had proceeded. There was one further interview, which was on the Tuesday before the third task. The Master in black, the dark-eyed one with the unyielding refusal of contractions, came up to the boy at the end of his last potions lesson of the term in the dungeon when the rest of the class had been dismissed, and the Master in black said, "Mr. Potter." "Professor." "You will be in the maze on the Saturday." "Yes, Professor." "You will not be alone in the maze." "No, Professor, there will be 3 other champions. There will be a 5th person, Professor." "I am not at liberty to tell you who." "I am at liberty to tell you that the 5th person was placed at this school in September by an arrangement which the headmaster did not, in his own judgment, see fit to interrupt at the time, on the principle that the boy from the organization was on the grounds, and that the boy from the organization would, at the appropriate hour, see fit to address the arrangement. The headmaster did not, on his own judgment, see fit to ask the boy whether he had observed the arrangement. Professor. "Yes, Mr. Potter. I have. I am gratified to hear it." "Will you, Professor, be in attendance at the maze?" "I will be on the grounds, Mr. Potter. I will not be in the maze. I will be standing with the other masters at the entrance. I shall be unavailable to you throughout as an operational asset." "I am aware, Professor. You have the means." "Yes, Professor. Mr. Potter, Professor, do not, in the maze, take an unnecessary risk on the school's behalf. No, Professor, do not, in the maze, take an unnecessary risk on the organization's behalf either." "No, Professor." "Then go, Mr. Potter, and be ready." "Yes, Professor." He had bowed. He had left. He had returned to his common room. He had written in the careful hand a 1-line note to Sir Integra. The 5th person is now confirmed by an internal source. Operational hygiene unchanged. Continuing to the maze on the Saturday, he had sealed it. He had sent it. She had written back, by the Friday's post, in 2 words, acknowledged. IFWH. On the Friday night, he had drunk from the flask before bed. In the half-measure Dr. Trevelyan had set for the night before an operation. He had laid out his clothes on the chair beside the bed. The charcoal 3-piece, the school robes over it for the headmaster's sake, the long oilskin coat in case the maze required it, the small length of monomolecular wire in the left sleeve of the 3-piece and the second length in the right, and the flask on the bedside table. He had climbed into bed. He had listened to the castle. The castle had listened back. The castle, like the manor, had grown in 4 years considerably fond of him, in the way that buildings can grow fond of children they have decided are theirs. In the small cellar 200 miles south, the man in the red coat sat on a wooden chair in the dark and waited. He had not, throughout the evening, moved. He had not, throughout the evening, required to. The flask on the floor at his feet held a small measure of the cellar master's reserve, of which he had not yet partaken. The walls of the cellar held the patient quiet of a thing that knew what was about to be required of it. The cellar door had not been locked. The cellar door had not been required to be, in a townhouse on Tower Street in central London, behind a desk of beeswax and old oak. Sir Integra finished her last cigarette of the evening and picked up the receiver. She did not dial. She held the receiver to her ear for the length of a long-held breath. She said very quietly into the receiver, "Servant." She heard in the answer the small theatrical clearing of a throat that had been waiting all evening for the call. "Mistress. Tomorrow. Tomorrow, mistress." "The boy is bait. He is, mistress." "The boy knows. He does, mistress. You will be in the cellar until the call." "I will, mistress." "You will on the call attend." "I will, mistress." "Servant, mistress, bring the apprentice home." "I shall, mistress." She put the receiver down. She lit a fresh cigarette. She watched the smoke go up the wall in its careful column. Outside the window, the rain that had been falling on Westminster since Thursday continued, evenly, without comment, in the manner of a city that had decided to be patient. In the dormitory of Slytherin, the boy turned on his side, closed his eyes and, on what was the last night of his 14th year of life and the last night of his 4th year of service, fell asleep on the second-best pillow. In the small, patient quiet of a junior officer with his clothes laid out on the chair beside the bed. Chapter 4 End Chapter 5. The maze and the headstones, the morning of the third task, came in clear over the highlands. The mist that had attended the lake had retired for the summer. The lawns under the boy's window were the deep green of a north country in early June. The stands above the Quidditch pitch had been re-erected for the maze. The maze itself, which had grown across the pitch over the preceding fortnight, stood 10 feet high in dense, dark, deliberately wakeful hedge. He dressed before dawn. He wore the charcoal three-piece under the school robes. He drank from the flask at the standard pre-operation measure. He laid his second-best comb on the bedside table, in the position the kitchen at the manor had taught him to lay a comb on the morning of a deployment, so that the kitchen would understand, if it was ever asked, that he had departed in good order. At 8, he had a breakfast he did not eat. At 9, he had a brief medical inspection from Madame Pomfrey, who pronounced him fit. At 10, he had a final briefing from the tournament officials, who took the 4 champions through the rules of the maze and reminded them of the rule against killing each other, which the officials had elected to include. With the dignity of a board addressing a paragraph, it would have preferred not to have to include. The boy did not, throughout the briefing, comment. Cedric Diggory, beside him, did not, throughout the briefing, comment. Victor Crumb on Cedric's other side did not, throughout the briefing, comment. Fleur de Lacquer at the far end did not, throughout the briefing, comment. The officials, who had been hoping for some response, had to be content with the polite silence of 4 champions who were, in their own private registers, calculating the rule against killing each other against the rule of operational pragmatism. At noon, Sir Integra arrived from London. Walter drove. Sir Integra walked up the lawn from the gates. Walter attended her with the black umbrella against the sun because Sir Integra preferred a steady shadow at her shoulder when she was on someone else's grounds. Sears was not in attendance. Sears was in the village of Little Hangleton. On a separate matter, Walter had not, on the file, briefed the boy on. The boy understood, without being told, that the separate matter was in fact the same matter, only on a different vector. The master was not on the lawn. The master was where the master had been the night before, in the cellar at the manor, on the wooden chair in the dark, waiting for the call. Boy, madam, maze, at 7, madam, flask, topped up at noon, madam, Dr. Trevelyan has signed it off. Wire, both sleeves, madam, knife. Right inside pocket of the 3-piece, madam, folded. Card, left breast pocket of the 3-piece, madam, sealed. She nodded. She did not, throughout the inventory, look at any of the inventoried items. She had been making the inventory of officers in the field since before the boy had been born. She had her own private confidence in the inventory and required only the verbal confirmation. Boy, madam, the portkey is in the cup at the center of the maze. The portkey will take whoever touches it to a graveyard in Little Hangleton, in the village. We have been certain of the portkey for 96 hours. The portkey was set by the 5th person in the school at the direction of a wizard who is, on the Bureau's terms, no longer alive, but who has, on his own terms, been engaged in a long campaign to reverse the condition. The cup is the agreed bait. You are the agreed asset. The graveyard is the agreed theatre. Do you understand? Yes, madam, you will take the portkey. You will not, before taking the portkey, deny the other 3 champions their opportunity to complete the maze. You will, in particular, deliver Cedric Diggory to the cup as a co-champion. You will then, by a courtesy you will have arranged with Mr. Diggory in advance, request his withdrawal so that you may take the portkey alone. Yes, madam. Have you spoken with Mr. Diggory? Yes, madam. He has been informed of the proposal in the broadest terms permissible under the agreement. He has agreed. Madam, boy. What is the master's location? In the cellar. He waits for the call. The call will be made on the moment the portkey activates. I have set the call in the cellar wall by means of a charm Madame Petriska taught me in the spring. The call will reach him without requiring an intermediate. The Bureau is informed. The Bureau is informed, madam. The Bureau has been informed since the Friday. The Bureau has cleared lethal force in the graveyard for any presence the Bureau has on file. Boy, madam. You will, on arrival at the graveyard, be required to be patient. You will be required, in particular, to permit a ritual to proceed to a point at which the ritual's instigator can be brought into the engagement on the same plane as the rest of the cell. You will not, until the master arrives, take action. You will not, in particular, fire on the instigator while the instigator is in his wraith phase. The wraith is not on the available evidence vulnerable to standard ordnance. Wait for the master. Yes, madam. You will permit yourself, in the course of the ritual, to be cut once for the necessary blood. The cut is the price of the operation. The cut will heal under the master's bloodline within minutes. You will not, under any other provocation, permit yourself to be cut twice. Yes, madam, boy. Madam, do not, in the graveyard, take the field action without the master. You are the bait. You will wait for the trap to be sprung by the trap's master. Do you understand? Yes, madam. Repeat. I am the bait, madam. I will wait for the master to spring the trap. I will not take the field action without him. Good. She did not, the boy thought, look entirely pleased to be giving the instruction. She looked at him, briefly, for the length of a slow-held breath, and gave him, with the casual ownership she had given him on the night of his first operation, the small brief pressure of a hand on the side of his arm, and turned and walked back across the lawn to the stands. Walter followed her with the umbrella. The boy watched her go. The boy thought of nothing in particular. He had nothing to think of. He had been issued his orders. He would execute them. At 7 the horn went. He entered the maze on the 3rd whistle. Cedric had entered on the 2nd. Victor on the 1st. Fleur on the 4th. The boy had been ranked 3rd on points entering the task, and the school's ranking had set him 3rd in the order. He had not, on his own private register, contested the ranking. The ranking had served the operation. The maze was darker on the inside than the maze had looked on the outside. The hedge above his head was a living thing of the most patient kind. He could hear the hedge listen to him as he walked along its inside. He could hear the hedge listen to the others on their separate trails. He could hear, beyond the hedge, the small breathing of the obstacles the school had set in the corners. He moved as he had been taught to move, at a steady pace, no faster than a man walks along a wet platform, with his hands open at his sides and his eyes on the corner of the next turn. He met Cedric at the 3rd intersection. Cedric had been waiting. Cedric did not, when the boy arrived, comment. The two of them turned together at the intersection and walked, in step, along the right-hand corridor at a steady pace. They did not, in the corridors of the maze, exchange any words. Words were not, the boy thought, necessary. Cedric had been briefed by the boy on the Tuesday in the corridor outside defense. The brief had been minimal, but had been sufficient. Cedric, on his own dignity, had agreed to deliver the boy to the cup as a co-champion. Cedric had asked, with the small, grim humor of a man who had understood the operation without having had it explained, what the boy required afterwards. The boy had said, "Withdrawal." Cedric had said, "Done." The treaty had held. They cleared 2 obstacles together in the second quarter of the maze. The first was a sphinx whose riddle the boy had answered before she had finished speaking, on the courteous principle that the sphinx had been deployed by the school to slow champions down and not, on his understanding, to embarrass herself. The sphinx had, after his answer, inclined her head and stepped aside, and Cedric, beside him, had said, with the quiet appreciation of a man watching a colleague perform the basic competences, "That was rude of you, Harry." The sphinx was looking forward to her speech. "My apologies, Mr. Diggory. I shall, on my next sphinx, recite the speech in full. That'll be the day." The second was a blast-ended scroot, which the boy had taken in the courteous manner of a man taking a chair from someone he had not been seated by. The wire had come out. The wire had completed its work. The wire had been wiped on a length of the boy's cravat. The wire had returned to the sleeve. Cedric had said, "Right, scroot, done." The 2 of them had walked on. They met Victor at the 4th quarter. Victor had been on his knees. Victor had been on his knees because Victor had been under the small, dim, sustained pressure of an imperious curse, cast on him by the 5th person on the school staff. And the 5th person, having cast the curse from outside the maze on the evidence of a long-distance projection charm Madame Petriska, had warned the boy about over Christmas, had instructed Victor to take Fleur out of the running, and then, on Victor's resistance, to take himself out of the running, and Victor was. At the moment, the boy and Cedric arrived, in the process of resisting the second instruction. The boy registered the situation. The boy moved. He placed his right hand on the back of Victor's neck and held the contact for the period. It took the boy's master's bloodline to pass through the contact and into the dim, sustained pressure on Victor's mind. In the small, specific manner the master had taught the boy in the 2nd year at the manor as a courtesy to civilians caught in long-distance projection charms. The pressure went. Victor's knees gave the small further sag of a man whose mind had been released from a long discipline and who had, accordingly, been permitted to feel the weight of his own knees again. Victor looked up at the boy. "Mr. Crumb, Potter, you will, with respect, be unable to continue. Please remain at this intersection. The maze will be cleared in 20 minutes, and the officials will retrieve you. I shall, on the operation's behalf, take action against the man who cast the curse. Do you understand?" "Yes." "Do you require water?" "No, walk on, Potter." He walked on. Cedric walked on with him. They did not, in the corridors of the 4th quarter, exchange any further words. They reached the center of the maze at the 3rd blue minute, which was 4 minutes inside the boy's private register for the operation. The cup stood on a small carved plinth in a circle of grass at the center of the maze, and the moon, which had come up over the eastern hedge in the last quarter of an hour, lit the cup the way a stage lights a prop. "Mr. Diggory, Mr. Potter, you and I have arrived at the cup as co-champions. I shall, by the rules of the tournament, register the joint victory with the officials following my withdrawal. Cedric, please withdraw." Cedric Diggory looked at him for the length of a long beat. The look was, the boy understood, the look of an officer of his own age who had decided to honor the treaty without further negotiation. Cedric stepped back a pace. He bowed half an inch to the cup. He bowed half an inch to the boy. He turned, and he walked back along the corridor by which they had come, at the unhurried pace of a man who had been told to leave a room and who was not going to fuss about leaving it. The boy stood alone in the circle of grass. He looked at the cup. He looked briefly at the eastern hedge, beyond which, on the far side of the country, his master sat in a cellar wall waiting for the call. He looked at the cup again. He reached out his right hand and touched the rim. He had been the bait many times in many small operations over 4 years. He had not been the bait, until that minute, on any operation of consequence. The portkey, when it took him with the rough, impersonal courtesy of a magical instrument used many times by hands that had not loved it. He was in the air. He was not in the air. He was in a place that had not yet decided which it was. Then he was on his feet on a wet patch of grass in the dark. He was in a graveyard. It was, on the available evidence, not a graveyard that had been kept up. The headstones were green with moss. The grass between them was knee-high. The yew on the south side had not been pruned in 20 years. A small Norman church stood at the western edge of the ground with its door open, on the principle, the boy thought, of a building that had long ago accepted that the parish had given up on it, and that the door no longer had any honest reason to stay shut. A man stood in the grass at the center of the ground. The man was small, in the way that men who had been small all their lives were small. The man was bald in the patches that small men tend not to be bald in. The man had a bundle in his arms which was the wrong shape for any bundle that a small man would have carried out of doors in a graveyard at night, on the available evidence, for any innocent reason. The bundle moved. A voice came out of the bundle. The voice was sibilant, even, and oddly amused. The voice was the voice of a man who had spent 10 years in a state which did not, on the file's terms, permit voice, and who had spent the 10 years rehearsing the voice he had intended to deliver on his return. Wormtail. Master. That is the boy. Master, that is the boy. He is not as I had been told he would be. Master, the boy has been raised by the Muggle Organization. The Muggle Organization has done with him I do not know what. He looks. Master, he looks. I observe what he looks. Wormtail, stake him. The small bald man set the bundle down on a low stone. The bundle continued to move on the low stone in the small impatient way of a thing that knew it would not have to wait for very much longer. The small bald man crossed the grass to the boy. The small bald man had a length of cord in his hand and a wand. He looked up at the boy. He blinked twice. He had been informed, by the voice in the bundle, that the boy on the wet grass would, on arrival, be paralyzed by surprise. He had not been informed that the boy on the wet grass would, on arrival, be standing at parade rest in a charcoal 3-piece, with his hands at his sides, looking, with the steady cordial politeness of a junior officer attending a meeting at a foreign embassy, at the place the voice had come from. "Good evening, sir," said the boy. The small bald man twitched. "Sir, please proceed." "Stand still, Potter." "I am standing still, sir. I shall continue to stand still throughout the ritual. The ritual is, on my mistress's standing orders, to be permitted to a certain point. You may bind me to the headstone behind me. I shall not resist. I shall not, on the same orders, speak unprompted. You may proceed at your own pace." The small bald man, who had been Peter Pettigrew, who had spent 13 years in a state which had taught him to be afraid of large objects in dark places, looked up at the boy of 14 in the charcoal 3-piece, and registered. In the slow private register of a small man who had spent 10 years rehearsing his return to a master who had not, on the available evidence, been informed of the recent biography of the boy, the precise small flicker of a man who had, on the wet grass of a graveyard at the end of a long day, just had his evening complicated. He raised the cord. He bound the boy to the headstone. The boy did not resist. The cord was applied competently in the lower wraps and incompetently in the upper, and the boy noted the incompetence in the upper for his own private register, and the boy did not, throughout the binding, alter his standing posture in any particular that the small bald man could observe. The voice in the bundle said, "Wormtail, begin." Master," the small bald man began. He began with a great iron cauldron at the center of the grass, which had been carried, the boy understood, into the graveyard before the boy's arrival. The cauldron was full of a thick liquid the boy could smell from 20 paces and which the boy recognized. With the small private pleasure of a young officer encountering a textbook example of an item the Bureau had taught him to recognize, as the regulation thaumaturgic medium for an emergency revivification, ritual, vintage approximately 1370, of the kind the Bureau had on file under. Ritual, bone, flesh, blood. The small bald man dropped the bundle into the cauldron. The thing inside the bundle which had been talking went on contact with the medium silent. Bone of the father, the small bald man said, unknowingly given, you will renew your son. He thrust his wand at the wet grass at the foot of an adjacent headstone. The grass parted. Earth rose. A long bone came out of the earth and lifted itself into the cauldron in the docile manner of a thing that had not, on the available evidence, been consulted on the matter. The cauldron hissed. Flesh of the servant, willingly sacrificed, you will revive your master. The small bald man drew from inside his coat a long curved knife. The boy noted the make of the knife. The boy noted the angle of the cut. The small bald man held his right hand over the rim of the cauldron, and the small bald man drew the knife across the wrist of his own right hand, and the small bald man's right hand fell into the cauldron, and the small bald man, on the loss of the hand, gave a small thin scream which he had been holding back for some time. The cauldron answered. The medium turned a color the boy had not previously seen. Blood of the enemy, forcibly taken, you will resurrect your foe. He had reached the boy now. He had a knife in the left hand, which was the one that he still possessed. The boy looked at him with the steady, cordial politeness of a junior officer attending a meeting at a foreign embassy. Sir Potter, please proceed. You are permitted the single cut at the right forearm. The cut will furnish you, on standard volume estimation for this ritual, with the required measure. Please do not, in your distress, exceed the single cut. My mistress's standing orders are that I am to permit one. Please understand that the boundary is not negotiable. You are mad. I am not, sir. I am at work. Please proceed. The small, bald man took the cut. He took it competently in the depth and incompetently in the angle, and the boy noted the incompetence in the angle for his own private register, and the small, bald man caught the issuing blood in a small glass phial from his coat, and he hobbled back to the cauldron. And he poured the contents of the phial into the cauldron, and the cauldron made the noise which, on the Bureau's file, the cauldron was supposed to make at the third stage of the ritual. The medium went from a color the boy had not previously seen to a color the boy had not previously known existed. Then it began to come together. It came together over the rim of the cauldron in the steady, patient manner of a thing that had taken 13 years to plan its assembly and was not going to be rushed at the last step. It came together as a tall man with bone-pale skin and slit pupils, and no nose and long, thin fingers, and the cold, particular face of a man who had, on the long evening of his discorporation, decided that he was not going to come back as anything that pretended to be a man anymore. He stepped out of the cauldron onto the wet grass. He stood upright. He stretched his fingers. He turned his head slowly, in the manner of a man testing the joint, and registered, on the wet grass, the boy bound to the headstone in the charcoal 3-piece, and the small bald man on his knees clutching the stump of his right wrist, and the church door at the western edge. And the U on the southern, and the moon, he laughed very quietly, Wormtail, my robe. Master. The small bald man on the available evidence had been holding the robe under his coat for the occasion. He produced it. He held it up. The tall, pale man took the robe and put it on in the small, fussy manner of a man dressing for an occasion he had been looking forward to. He stretched his fingers a second time. He looked at the boy. Harry Potter. Sir, did you say sir? Yes, sir. You have been raised by the people in the red coats. Yes, sir. They will not be coming for you in this graveyard, Harry Potter. I have been told about the people in the red coats. They are not on my book. They are on my book, a small private Muggle indulgence of the British government. They are not on my book, persons who concern themselves with the affairs of wizards. They will not on my book find you here. They will not on my book find you anywhere I do not first permit them to find you. Do you understand? Yes, sir, Wormtail, summon them. The small, bald man, on his knees, fumbled at his left arm and produced, by the gesture of one who had been waiting 15 years for the gesture, the small ritual of summons that the tall, pale man had taught him in the early 80s. They began, then, to arrive. They arrived in a slow, steady ring around the cauldron. They arrived in robes of black, with hoods raised, in the manner of men who had been instructed to dress in the manner they had been dressing in when they had last been dressed. They arrived without sound, in the careful apparition of trained operatives. They arrived to the count of 12. The tall, pale man, who had been laughing quietly at the boy, walked the ring with the small, fussy pleasure of a host who had been afraid, at the back of his mind, that nobody would come. Avery, Master, Macnair, Master, Knott, Master, Crabbe, Goyle, Rosier, Mulciber, Yaxley, Rookwood, Travers, Selwyn, Lestrange, Master, he went the ring. He did not, on the available evidence, find each of them at the count he had expected. He did not, all the same, take the gap in the count as cause to delay the moment he had been planning. He returned to the center of the ring. He stood beside the boy at the headstone. He inclined his head fractionally to the boy. Harry Potter, sir. You will, before the evening is out, be permitted a small monologue. I have been informed by the file that I owe you a monologue. The monologue will be delivered after I have completed the courtesies with my friends. The monologue will be followed by your death. The death will be witnessed by my friends, and by the photographers I have brought with me, and by the small selection of wizarding journalists whose names you have not been told. The death will be reported in the morning in the Prophet as the fall of the boy who lived. The death will be commemorated by the wizarding world in due course. Is the schedule clear? Yes, sir. You are very calm, Harry Potter. Yes, sir. It is on the file unusual. I have been trained, sir, in the conduct of an officer at parade rest. I am at parade rest. Wormtail. Master, loosen the upper wraps. The boy is to be free of the headstone on his feet in the center of the ring for the monologue. I prefer to monologue to a standing audience. Loosen them. The small, bald man crossed the grass and loosened the upper wraps. The cord fell. The boy stepped, on the soft grass, away from the headstone to the center of the ring. He stood at parade rest. He did not, by the small adjustments his master had taught him over 4 years, alter, by any of the men in the ring around him, his pulse from the standard standing rest. The men in the ring around him registered the absence of altered pulse, with the slow private interest of a class of senior operatives who had been told that they were going to be addressed by a prisoner under duress, and who had now found that the prisoner had not, in any operationally measurable manner, been put under duress. Harry Potter, sir, I am, by accident of necessity, your relation. Sir, I am, in fact, the only person in your living family who is at this moment within 10 feet of you. Yes, sir, you have been told this. I have, sir. By my mistress, at briefing, in the South Study at her house, in the summer of my 11th year of life. The information has been on the file since. Your mistress. Yes, sir, Wormtail. The boy speaks of his guardian. I have not been informed by you that the guardian is a woman. Master. The guardian is Sir Integra, of the family, the lock on the file is at, quiet, Wormtail. Master, Harry Potter, sir, tell me about your mistress. I have, sir, been instructed not to discuss my mistress at length with persons who are not on my mistress's file. I shall, with respect, decline the topic. You may, sir, ask another. The tall, pale man, who had been amused, stopped being amused. The men in the ring around him, who had been amused, took the small private note that their master had stopped being amused and adjusted their attentiveness accordingly. The tall, pale man stepped closer. The tall, pale man drew his wand. The tall, pale man held the wand at the boy's chest. "Harry Potter, sir, you are going to die in this graveyard. With respect, sir, I am not." "Do you say not?" "With respect, sir, I have been issued my orders for the evening, and the orders include at the 3rd hour my return to my mistress's house by my master's escort. The master is, at this moment, in a cellar 200 miles south of here, waiting for a call. The call will be made by me. I have been instructed by my mistress to wait until the trap is sprung by the trap's master. I shall, with respect, conduct myself in accordance with the instruction. You may, sir, in the meantime, deliver your monologue. I am at parade rest." The wand at his chest did not move. The tall, pale man did not, on the available evidence, move. The tall, pale man's slit pupils made the very small adjustment of a man who had, on the wet grass of a country graveyard at the end of a long 13 years, been informed by a 14-year-old boy that the evening was not, after all, the evening the man had spent 13 years planning. "Wormtail, Master, the portkey was set this morning. Master, the portkey was set this morning. The boy was bound this evening. Master, the boy was bound this evening. And the boy is, at this minute, telling me that his master is in a cellar 200 miles south of here, waiting for a call which the boy will be making from this graveyard. Master, I do not have, the file did not, quiet Wormtail, Master, Harry Potter, sir. Make the call." The boy did not, on the available evidence, move. He did not require to. He had set the call in his master's cellar wall 6 days before by means of the small Romanian charm Madame Petrusca had taught him in the spring. The charm had been waiting since. He had only to release it. The release was a single thought. He released it. In the small cellar 200 miles south, in a country house with 12 bays and a rose garden, the wall said very quietly in the boy's voice, "Master." The man on the wooden chair in the dark stood up. The man on the wooden chair in the dark inclined his head a fraction to the wall, in the brief formal bow of a host receiving an expected guest. The man on the wooden chair in the dark walked, in the unhurried pace of a man crossing his own parlor, to the cellar door. The cellar door opened by itself. The corridor on the other side of the door was empty. The corridor on the other side of the door knew better than to be occupied at the hour the man crossed it. The man went up to the south door of the house. The man went out onto the gravel. The man inclined his head once at the rose garden, in the brief courtesy of a guest taking leave of a host he expected to return to, and then the man was no longer on the gravel. In a townhouse on Tower Street, behind a desk of beeswax and old oak, Sir Integra Fairbrook Wingate's Hellsing finished her cigarette, picked up the receiver of a private line which had been installed in the house in 1958 and which connected directly to the Bureau's emergency desk, and said into it, in a level voice, "Active, Little Hangleton, cleared lethal, end." The Bureau's emergency desk said, "Acknowledged, ma'am, cordon up at 12 minutes. She put the receiver down. She did not, on the available evidence, light another cigarette. She walked, instead, to the window of the study and stood at it with her hands behind her back and looked out at the rain, which had not stopped on Westminster in 3 days, and which was, on the available evidence, not going to stop on Westminster that night. In the graveyard, the tall, pale man with the slit pupils looked at the boy who had made the call, and the men in the ring around them looked at the tall, pale man with the small, careful interest of senior operatives who had been informed that their evening had been complicated. And the small, bald man on his knees at the foot of the cauldron looked at his stump, and then at the tall, pale man, and then, with the small private prayer of a man who had spent 13 years afraid of large objects in dark places, at the yew tree at the southern edge of the ground, beyond which the boundary of the graveyard ran down to the lane that led, 1/4 of a mile, to the church at Little Hangleton. A footstep sounded along the lane. It was not a hurried footstep. It was a footstep at the unhurried pace of a man crossing a station platform. It was a footstep that did not, on the available evidence, intend to surprise the ring of operatives at the cauldron. It was, on the available evidence, a footstep that intended to be heard, then a second footstep, then a third. The men in the ring around the cauldron turned. The yew tree at the southern edge of the ground moved in a wind that was not blowing. The tall, pale man with the slit pupils, who had been smiling at the boy, looked, very slowly, past the boy's right shoulder, in the direction of the lane. The boy, at parade rest in the center of the ring, smiled the small, quiet smile he had been taught by his master 4 years ago in the South Study at the Manor on the evening of his first operation. He said, very politely, into the long quiet of the graveyard, "Good evening, Master." Chapter 5, Chapter 6. Releasing Control Art Restriction System Level 0. The footsteps along the lane reached the lich gate. The lich gate, on the available evidence, had not been opened in 20 years. The lich gate had been waiting for the courtesy of a guest who would open it without requiring it to be told. The man on the far side of the lich gate placed a gloved hand on the latch. The latch, which had decided in the long evening of its disuse that no further hand would ever touch it, decided on touch that this hand was the one it had been waiting for. The latch rose. The gate swung. He came into the graveyard at the unhurried pace of a guest entering a parlor to which he had been invited. He wore the long red coat that should have caught on the wind and did not. The crown of his hat had been turned up by the wind that was not blowing. Round amber glasses caught the moon and gave it back unimproved. His boots, which left no print on the wet grass, advanced along the lane between the moss-green headstones at the leisured pace of a man who had been told that an old friend was waiting at the center of the ground, and who had decided to make the friend wait the additional minute that would render the friend grateful. The men in the ring around the cauldron did not, at first, react. The men in the ring around the cauldron had been trained by long service in the Wraith years and the longer service of the older line in the steady discipline of a black-robed corps. They had been instructed to honor the master's pause. They were honoring it. The tall, pale man at the center of the ring stood with his wand at the boy's chest and his slit pupils on the lane and the small fixed face of a king who had been informed, on the evening of his coronation, that a country he had been told did not exist had sent an ambassador. He composed his face. He composed his voice. He addressed the man at the gate. "You will be the Muggle Organization?" "I will, sir. You will not be welcome in this graveyard." "I will not, sir. You will retire." "I will not, sir." The tall, pale man tilted his head a fraction. The men in the ring around the cauldron registered the tilt. The yew at the southern edge of the ground moved, very slightly, in the wind that was not blowing. The boy at the center of the ring did not move. He had been issued his orders. He would execute them. He stood at parade rest. The cord that had been the upper wraps of his binding lay at his feet in the grass. He waited. The man at the gate inclined his head to the boy, in the small private formality of a senior officer recognizing the standing of a junior officer who had completed a delicate piece of preliminary work. "My fledgling, master, you have been patient." "Yes, master, you have made the call." "Yes, master, you have not in the course of the evening been required to feed." "No, master, you have not eaten the sorting hat." "No, master." "Then I am, my fledgling, pleased." He proceeded down the lane between the headstones with the small, unhurried, theatrical pleasure of a man who had been waiting 15 minutes for a curtain. He stopped at the inside of the ring. The men in the ring around the cauldron, who had not previously been informed in their briefings what the man in the red coat looked like at close quarters, registered the close quarters with the slow private interest of senior operatives who had been told that they were going to be addressed by a Muggle gardener, and who had now discovered that the Muggle gardener was, on the available evidence, the gardener of a country they had not been informed of. The tall, pale man took his wand from the boy's chest. He pointed it instead at the man in the red coat. "You will be his master." "I will, sir." "You will, on the available file, be called the No-Life King." "I will, sir." "I do not, sir, recognize your charter." "Sir, you do not require to." "Sir, I am Lord Voldemort. I am, by the agreement of the wizarding world, the only Dark Lord that body has seen fit to recognize in the present century. I am, on this graveyard, the host of the evening. I will require you to retire." "Sir." "Yes." "I have not, sir, retired in 571 years. I do not, sir, intend to begin tonight." "Then, sir, I shall enforce the retirement." "Sir, please proceed." The tall, pale man smiled the small, bone-pale smile he had spent 13 years rehearsing. The slit pupils made the small adjustment of a man bringing his focus down to a point. The wand made the small motion the men in the ring around him had been waiting for. The green light came up the wand in the small instant of an old curse, leaving an old hand at the apex of an old career. Avada Kedavra. The green light crossed the 4 feet of grass between the wand and the man in the red coat at the speed of a small old curse. The man in the red coat had time, during the crossing, to inquire of his fledgling, in the small private register he had reserved for asides over the 4 years of their acquaintance, whether the fledgling had been keeping up with his Romanian conjugations. "My fledgling." "Master." "Have you been keeping up with your Romanian?" "Yes, master." "Recite the irregular of the verb associ." "Sosusk, soshti, sosisht, sosim, sositi, sosusk." "Master." "Past." "Am sosit, ai sosit, a sosit, am sosit, ati sosit, o sosit." "Master." "Tone." "Master." "Tone, my fledgling." The auxiliary takes the front of the syllable. "Am sosit, ai sosit, a sosit." "Master." "Better." The green light arrived at the man in the red coat's chest. The man in the red coat did not, at any point during the arrival, alter his posture. The green light entered his chest in the manner of a small old curse arriving at a chest, which had not, on the available evidence, been arranged to receive any curse smaller than the one which had, 4 centuries earlier, failed to take. The green light, on contact, was absorbed in the silent manner of a stone dropped into a deep well. The man in the red coat smiled the small smile he had smiled in a cupboard in Surrey 8 years before. "Sir." "What? Was that the monologue, sir, or the curse?" "The curse." "And the monologue will follow." "Sir, I shall not, on the available evidence, be able to attend the monologue. I have, on my mistress's standing orders, been authorized to release the first 3 of the seals at her discretion this evening, with discretion on the 4th, 5th, and 0th, on my own initiative pending field observation. I shall, accordingly, release the first now. Please understand that the courtesy is not, sir, personal." He raised his right hand. He turned the palm. On the back of the glove there had been, in the language of the long line, a small ornate written restriction in the old Hungarian, which the man in the red coat now permitted, by the smallest of his many small theatrical gestures, to be 1 half-line shorter. The line on the glove flared. The line on the flare was a little less than it had been. The change was, at the surface of the night, the change of a candle that had been a candle becoming a candle that was a slightly larger candle. At the inside of the man in the red coat, the change was the change of a long shoreline of black water becoming a slightly longer shoreline. The men in the ring around the cauldron registered the change. The tall, pale man at the center of the ring registered the change. The wind that was not blowing, but which had nevertheless been the wind throughout the evening, blew at the change, in a direction it had not, on the available evidence, blown before. "Cordon 1, said the man in the red coat, in the small old Hungarian. The thing in his coat that had been a coat answered. The first of the cordon came out of the coat at the level of his right hip. It came out, in the manner of an animal that had been kept indoors all day and had been told that it might now be permitted, briefly, the lawn. It was a hound. It had been a hound, in some prior arrangement of its long career, of an ordinary kind. It was, on the evening of the graveyard, a hound of a less ordinary kind. It had a black coat that was not, on the available evidence, fur. It had a number of eyes that did not, on the available evidence, agree on the number among themselves. It had a mouth that did not, on the available evidence, stop at the corners. It looked at the men in the ring around the cauldron with the small, mild courtesy of a hound that had been instructed not to bite. A second hound came out at the level of the man in the red coat's left shoulder. A third, at the right. A fourth, at the small of the back. A fifth, at the crown of the hat. The fifth was so small that it could have sat in the palm of a man's hand. The fifth was also, by some agreement of geometry only the long Hungarian line had ever entirely understood, the largest of the five. The hounds, in their five, arranged themselves in the slow, careful order of a hunt, awaiting the master's whistle. The man in the red coat raised his free hand. He did not whistle. He said, in the polite formality of a host concluding the preliminary courtesies, "Sir." "What?" "You will, sir, be required to die." "You will not, sir. The matter is no longer subject to your participation." "Wormtail, the portkey, get me the portkey." Master, the portkey, Wormtail." The small, bald man on his knees at the foot of the cauldron looked at the cup, which had been used as the portkey. The cup had been on the wet grass at the boy's headstone. The cup had been, since the boy's arrival, off duty. The cup had been a portkey to bring a champion to the graveyard, and a portkey was, on the available file, a one-direction instrument. The cup would not, on the available file, return its passenger. The small, bald man understood this. The small, bald man understood, also, that he had run out of evenings. He understood, finally, that the man with the slit pupils and the bone-pale skin who had been, until this evening, his only employer, had taken 8 seconds to register the same fact, and that the small, bald man would not, for the remainder of those 8 seconds, be required to be patient. The small, bald man stood up. The small, bald man on the stump of his right wrist raised his good hand. The small, bald man said, "Master, I have served you well. Please." The man in the red coat, who had been smiling at the tall, pale man, turned his face very slightly to the small, bald man. The smile did not, at any point, alter. "Police boy." "Master." "Take Wormtail." "Yes, master." He moved. He moved in the small, specific fluency of a junior officer who had been instructed for 4 years in the courtesy of taking the smallest target on a board first. The wire came out of his left sleeve at the moment his right foot found the wet grass at the second step. The wire passed through the small, bald man at the level of the collar. The small, bald man's head separated. The small, bald man's body, which had been holding, on the stump of the right wrist, the considerable weight of 13 years of unfinished business, settled by degrees into the patient heap of a man who had been issued, in the short space of an evening, both his pardon and his sentence. The boy retrieved the wire. He wiped it on a length of his cravat. He returned it to his sleeve. He stepped back to his parade rest at the inside of the ring. "Master, my fledgling, Wormtail is taken. I have observed orders. You will hold the ring at the southwestern arc, from the church door to the U. You will take the 4 operatives at the southwestern arc with the wire. You will not, in the taking, exceed your standard pulse. I shall take the center and the southeastern arc with the cordon. The northern arc is for the police girl." "Master, police girl, master." The voice came down the lane from the lich gate. It was a chirpy voice. It was a voice that had been issued, on the evening of the graveyard, the privilege of attending the host's spectacle, and which intended to attend the spectacle with the small professional pleasure of a junior officer who had been waiting 4 years for an outing of this caliber. Sierra's Victoria stepped through the gate. She had her Harkonnen on a strap across her back and her smaller pistol on the hip and her hair tied up under a black beret. She inclined her head to the man in the red coat. She inclined her head to the boy. She did not, throughout, alter her smile. "Right then, master. Northern arc, 4 operatives, no quarter. police girl. Master, you may on this engagement sing. Right then, the hounds at the man in the red coat's shoulders bowed in the slow, careful courtesy of a pack acknowledging the call. The men in the ring around the cauldron unhooded, in the slow, careful courtesy of operatives, acknowledging that their evening had become, on the available evidence, the engagement of their lives. The tall, pale man at the center of the ring, who had been still, took the small, old step back of a man who had not, in 50 years of careful preparation, encountered a situation his preparation had not anticipated. The dark mark on the inside of his left arm pulsed in the dimensional patterns of a thing that had decided, after 15 years of patience, to be afraid. The man in the red coat clapped his hands together, once in the small theatrical gesture of a host concluding the preliminaries. Cordon 2. The second restriction on the back of the glove went the way of the first. The black water inside the man in the red coat became, in the small instant of its release, a sea. What happened in the next 90 seconds in the little Hangleton graveyard would be entered, in the morning, in the Bureau's after-action register under the heading Operation Headstone, Summary. The summary would be one paragraph. The summary would be the official record. The official record would not, in any of its 11 sentences, lie. It would, by the dignity of bureaucratic understatement, withhold a number of the more vivid details. The 11 sentences would be, on the file, sufficient. The men in the ring around the cauldron drew their wands. They cast, in the polished simultaneous reflex of operatives drilled in the choreography of the long line, 11 killing curses. 8 of the curses crossed the grass to the man in the red coat, and were absorbed in the same patient manner the first had been absorbed. 3 of the curses crossed the grass to the boy, whose master had not, on this evening, given the boy the courtesy of absorbing curses for him. The boy moved, on the second curse, in the small, precise lateral step Walter had drilled into him over 6 years on the back lawn of the manor. The first curse passed through the place his shoulder had been a half-second before, and the second, through the place his head had been a quarter-second before, and the third, the boy caught, on the small Romanian charm Madame Petresca had set into the lining of his three-piece in the spring. In the small folding inversion which the charm performed on every killing curse it had been asked to perform on, and the curse was returned across the grass to its originator, an operative on the southwestern arc, whose name was Yaxley, and Yaxley fell. The boy did not, in the lateral step, alter his pulse from the standard standing rest. The southeastern arc and the center were the master's. The master moved. He moved in the slow, leisured pace of a man who had been instructed not to startle the operatives in front of him, and the slow, leisured pace at which he moved was, by the geometry of the long line, fast enough that the operatives in front of him did not have the opportunity to register the movement before the consequences. The first hound at his right shoulder, which had been an ordinary hound in some prior arrangement, took an operative called McNair through the abdomen, and the operative called McNair was, in the small short moment of being taken, no longer in the abdomen, in the head, in the shoulders, or in any other arrangement which an operative customarily preferred to be in. The second hound at his left shoulder took an operative called Rosier through the throat. The third at the back took an operative called Mulciber through the spine. The fourth at the small of the back took an operative called Travers, and Travers, on being taken, made a small surprised noise of a kind which had not been heard in the little Hangleton graveyard since the parish had given up on the church. The fifth hound, the smallest, which was the largest, took the center. The tall, pale man at the center of the ring was, on the available file, a wizard of considerable personal accomplishment, who had on multiple occasions overcome more conventional opposition by the means of curses he had crafted himself, and which had not yet been logged by the Bureau's senior cataloguer. He performed, on the arrival of the fifth hound, the curse he had been holding in reserve since the night Wormtail had brought him back from the east. The curse was a curse of dispersion. The curse had, on prior application to organic and semi-organic opposition, scattered the opposition across a radius of 40 yards. The curse, on application to the fifth hound, did not, on the available evidence, scatter anything. The fifth hound had been instructed, by long doctrine, that scattering was the property of opposition the fifth hound did not respect, and the fifth hound did not, on the night of the graveyard, respect any of the opposition in the ring. The fifth hound proceeded. It proceeded in the small, careful manner of a thing taking apart a model that had been put together hastily. It located the small core of the tall, pale man's recent revivification, which had been, on the file, the bone of the father and the flesh of the servant and the blood of the enemy, and it located each of the three components separately, and it returned each of the three components to its origin. The bone of the father to the earth at the foot of the headstone from which the bone had risen, the flesh of the servant to the patient heap of the small, bald man on the wet grass, the blood of the enemy in the small, specific portion in which the tall, pale man had taken it, to the open cut on the boy's right forearm, which knitted on the return with the small, docile patience of a wound that had not, on the file, expected to be returned to so soon. What remained, after the return of the three components, was the wraith. The wraith was the thing that had been, throughout the 13 years, the only continuous element of the tall, pale man's career. The wraith had been, in those 13 years, separately housed in a set of small, ornate vessels, of which one had been the diary, one the locket, one the cup, one the diadem, one the ring, one the snake, and one a fragment in the forehead of a Surrey boy. The man in the red coat lifted his head a fraction. He smiled the small old smile he had smiled at the boy in the cupboard. He sampled the air. "My fledgling, master, the wraith has friends." "Yes, master, 6 of them." "6, master." 5 of them are, on the available evidence, where the Bureau has had them on file since the spring. "Yes, master. The 6th, my fledgling, is in a snake." "Yes, master. The snake is, on the available evidence, in a house at the western edge of the village." "Yes, master." "After the engagement, you will fetch the snake." "Yes, master." He inclined his head. The wraith, which had been hovering at the center of the ring in the small, undignified manner of a soul, which had been informed that its recent cooperation had been redistributed, twisted, in the small, dim manner of a thing which had been planning, over the 13 years, to issue a great proclamation on the occasion of its return, and which had now been informed that the proclamation would be made into a registry of dispersals. The wraith, by the small available means of a wraith, said, "Sir." The man in the red coat turned his head a fraction. "You will be the wizard, sir. You will, on the available file, be a wizard of considerable personal accomplishment." "Sir, I do not, on the available file, deal with wizards." "Sir, I shall demonstrate." It tried. It tried, in the small available manner of a wraith, to enter the man in the red coat by the right ear, which was the route of entry the wraith had been keeping in reserve for occasions of this kind. The right ear of the man in the red coat had been, in 57 of the preceding 71 years, used by various incumbents of the wraith's profession as the route of attempted entry, and each of the 57 had been received, on entry, by a hospitality which the man in the red coat preferred to host on his own terms. The wraith was received accordingly. The wraith was, on entry, registered. The wraith was, on registration, filed. The wraith was, on filing, placed in the long, quiet room of the man in the red coat's own internal arrangements, where the wraith joined the 57 previous tenants in the dignified position of a small soul, which had not, on the available file, finished sufficiently to be permitted the courtesy of a clean departure, and which would, on the master's discretion, be permitted to remain in the room for the term of the master's natural span, which, on the available file, was at the present time indefinite. The dark mark on the inside of every operative's left arm in the ring did, in the small instant of the wraith's filing, the thing it had not done in 15 years. It went out. It did not go out the way the dark mark had gone out in 1981. It went out the way a candle goes out when the wick has been pinched between two careful fingers. The operatives in the ring around the cauldron, who had been engaged with the southwestern arc and the northern arc, and the southeastern arc and the cordon, registered the going out of their marks at the precise moment they each, separately, registered the cessation of their employment. The boy at the southwestern arc completed his 4 operatives at the standard standing rest. The police girl at the northern arc completed her 4 operatives at the standard standing rest, with the small additional courtesy of a verse of an old marching song the kitchen at the manor sang on the 2nd of every June. The hounds at the master's shoulders completed the center and the southeastern arc at the leisured pace of a hunt that had been told that the day was its own. The cauldron, which had been hissing throughout, gave a small private gurgle of a thing that had been emptied of its operational charter, and which was, on the available evidence, no longer required to host any further ritual that century. The graveyard, which had been a graveyard, was a graveyard again. The man in the red coat clapped his hands together twice in the small theatrical conclusion of a host releasing his servants from the long evening. The hounds at his shoulders bowed and were no longer at his shoulders. The wind that had been the wind throughout the engagement no longer required to be the wind. The yew at the southern edge of the ground settled. The moon, which had been a witness, returned to the small private business of the moon. My fledgling, master, test, master. You have not on this evening released. I would have your release. Now, master, now, my fledgling, on the western lane there is a snake. Take the snake, the release will be necessary. Yes, master, he walked through the gate. He walked along the lane to the small village house at the western edge of the village, which the bureau had had on file since the spring. The door of the house opened, on his arrival, in the polite manner of a door that had been waiting for the courtesy of a guest who would open it without requiring it to be told. He went in. The hall of the house smelled of long, unfinished business. The hall of the house smelled of a soul that had been kept in too small a body for too long. The snake was at the center of the parlor, on the carpet, in the small dim watching coil of a familiar that had been informed, the previous evening, that the night might require its presence. The snake said, in the language Madame Petriska had taught the boy in his 9th year of life, "You will be the boy." "I will, sir. You will be the boy who has cost my master." "I will, sir. I am not on the file the only one of my master's friends. You are, sir, the 6th. The other 5 have, on the available file, been retrieved by the Bureau at midnight in 5 separate counties. The retrievals are complete. You are, sir, the last. Please proceed." The snake proceeded. The snake had a strike that had been, on the available file, the strike of an old country snake under the careful long doctrine of its master. The boy did not, on the snake's strike, alter his standard standing rest. He raised his right hand. He turned the palm. On the back of his glove there had been, in the small ornate written restriction of the master's bloodline, the apprentice form of his lord's seal, which had been set there on the night he had been turned at the age of 7, and which had been waiting, for 7 years, for the courtesy of release. He permitted the seal in the small instant of the snake's strike, the courtesy. The release did not, at the surface of the parlor, alter the parlor. The parlor was the parlor. The release altered, at the inside of the boy, in the small specific manner of a thing being permitted, for the first time in 7 years, to extend itself to the bounds of its own training, the small careful arrangement of a junior officer who had been at parade rest in a charcoal 3-piece. The arrangement extended. The boy was at the inside of the parlor, the same boy at parade rest. The boy was at the inside of his own arrangement, briefly, the sea his master had taught him to keep. The sea was a small sea. The sea was not the master's sea. The sea was the apprentice's, in the small bestial folds of a thing that had been told, by long doctrine, that it would, on its master's eventual permission, be the sea its master required. The sea opened. The sea contained, in its small dark folds, the dogs of war in miniature. 5 of them, in the small careful arrangement of 5 hounds the master kept at his shoulders. The hounds came out of the small instant of the apprentice's release at the small distance between the boy's right hand and the snake's open mouth. The snake was taken. The taking was the small careful taking of a thing being undone by a thing it had not, on the file, expected to encounter at the age and station to which it had risen. The 6th fragment of the wraith, which had been the snake's tenant, was registered, was filed, was placed in the small instant of its taking into the long, quiet room which the boy's master kept at the inside of his own arrangement, where the 6th fragment joined the 5 fragments which the Bureau had retrieved at midnight in 5 separate counties, and the 7th fragment which had been in the boy's forehead at the age of 7, and the 8th fragment which had been in the tutor's turban at the age of 11, and the 7th and the 8th, which the master had been keeping in the cellar of the manor in a glass jar, were brought up, in the small instant of the release, by the patient long doctrine, to join the other 6 in the long quiet room of their final tenancy. The boy closed his right hand. The seal on the back of his glove returned to the small ornate written restriction it had been before the release. The dogs of war in miniature returned to the small bestial folds of the apprentice's sea, which closed in the small docile fashion of a thing that had been instructed not to remain extended beyond the necessary minute. He stood at the center of the parlor, alone, with the patient heap of a snake at his feet. The man in the red coat said from the open front door, "My apprentice, master, pulse, standard standing rest, master, hand, steady, master, tired, no, master, hungry," he considered. "Yes, master." The man in the red coat smiled the small smile he had smiled in the cupboard 8 years before and reached inside his coat and produced the small silver flask, and the boy took the flask, and the boy drank from it, and they went out of the parlor together into the lane. Sears was waiting at the lich gate of the graveyard. Walter had brought the Bentley up the lane from the village. The cauldron was, on the available evidence, a small heap of clean ash beside the headstones. The headstones, which had been moss green, were moss green still. The graveyard had not, throughout the engagement, altered. The graveyard had been, throughout the engagement, the graveyard. The bureau, by the cordon Sir Integra had set up at 12 minutes, was already on the ground, in the small efficient arrangement of officers in fawn coats who had been instructed to walk the field and to log the heaps, and to forget the heaps in the proper order on the morning to come. A small dim apparition occurred at the southern edge of the ground. It was the headmaster. He came out of the apparition at the unhurried pace of a man who had been informed that the evening's operation had been completed without his attendance, and who had decided, on his own dignity, to be at the conclusion of the operation rather than absent from it. He wore the deep midnight blue robes the boy had first seen him wear on the front steps of the manor. He had on his face the small patient expression of a grandfather who had decided that he would not, in the available years, be the grandfather of the available boys, and who would, all the same, be on the field of the evening at the boy's elbow. "Mr. Potter." "Headmaster." "You have completed the operation." "Yes, headmaster. The wraith and the 6 fragments have been retrieved. Wormtail has been taken. The cell at the center of the ring has been taken. The boy is, on the available evidence, no longer of operational concern to my mistress in this matter." "Mr. Potter." "Headmaster, you have not, on this evening, been at school." "No, headmaster. The school will be informed by my mistress's secretary that I have been on the operation. The school will be expected to alter the public record of the 3rd task accordingly. The school will be permitted by my mistress, the discretion in the framing. Mr. Potter. Yes, headmaster, you are on the available record 14 years old. Yes, headmaster, you will return to school in the morning. Yes, headmaster. By the 8 o'clock train from Hogsmeade, which I shall board at Euston after my breakfast at the manor. Mr. Potter. Headmaster, you will, at the available age, be permitted to grow. I shall endeavour to, headmaster. The headmaster looked at him for the long quiet of a held breath. The twinkle that had not been on his face in 3 years made the small fractional return of a thing remembered. He inclined his head to the boy. He inclined his head to the man in the red coat. He inclined his head, with the small careful courtesy of a gentleman, to Sears at the Lichgate and to Walter at the Bentley. He turned, on the gravel of the lane, and was gone in the same small, inelegant pop with which he had departed the front steps of the manor 3 years before. They drove south. They drove south in the patient, steady pace of a black Bentley which had not, on the available evidence, hurried for any operation in the present century. The boy, in the back seat beside his master, did not sleep. He looked, very carefully, the way the streetlights of the country lanes came and went across the upholstery. He listened to the engine the way an officer of 14 listens to the breathing of the long, quiet animal of his trade. The police girl in the passenger seat hummed quietly the marching song the kitchen at the manor sang on the 2nd of every June. Walter at the wheel did not, throughout the drive, comment. The man in the red coat at the boy's left did not, throughout the drive, comment either. He had inclined his head, at the start of the drive, to the boy, in the small private formality of a senior officer recognizing the standing of a junior officer who had completed a long piece of preliminary work, and the boy had returned the inclination. And the small private formality had been sufficient. They arrived at the manor at 3 in the morning. The manor, which had been waiting, was awake. The under-housekeeper was at the south door with a clean handkerchief and a flannel that had been soaked in cool water. The cook, in the kitchen, had a pan on. Sir Integra Fairbrook, Wingate's Hellsing, was in the south study at the desk of beeswax and old oak. She had not, on the available evidence, slept. The cigarette in her glove was at the long, careful column of a smoker who had been keeping the column up for hours. Walter. Madam. The boy. Madam. Standard standing rest throughout, no deviation from protocol. The apprentice form was released at the appropriate minute in the parlour at the western edge of the village. The seal was restored at the conclusion. The asset is intact. Servant. Mistress. The wraith. Filed mistress. The 6 fragments. Filed mistress. The 7th and the 8th, which were in the jar, have been brought up to join the others. The collection is, mistress, complete. Cordon. At standard cordon, mistress. The Bureau will file the public report by 10. The school will alter the public record of the 3rd task by lunchtime. The headmaster has been spoken with. H.M. She set the cigarette in the ash dish on the desk. She did not throughout alter her expression. She rose from the desk. She walked in the small, unhurried pace of a woman crossing her own parlour to the boy. Boy. Madam, show me your forearm. He showed her his right forearm. The cut which had been the cut was no longer the cut. The forearm was the forearm. H.M. Walter. Madam, a stemmed glass. Madam, which year? The reserve. Madam, he brought it. He brought it on the small silver salver. The bowl held the standard measure. The boy took the glass with his right hand by the stem in the careful manner of the kitchen's long instruction. He raised the glass. He looked briefly over the rim at Sir Integra. He drank. She watched him drink. She did not, on the available evidence, alter her expression. When he had finished, she took the glass from his hand and returned the glass to Walter and gave the boy, with the casual ownership of a woman who had been keeping the ownership for 8 years, the small brief pressure of a hand on the side of his arm. She did not, on the available evidence, smile. She did, in the small specific way that meant, in the language of the manor, that she had taken the boy on as her own in the unstated sense which she had not, in the available years, found the occasion to state, incline her head 1/4 of an inch. Boy, madam. You will sleep tonight in the blue room. Yes, madam. You will take your breakfast at 8 in the kitchen with the staff. Yes, madam. You will, after breakfast, take the 8 o'clock train from Hogsmeade in the manner of a schoolboy who has had an interesting weekend. Yes, madam. Boy. Madam. In the morning of the day on which you complete your school career, which is on the available file the morning of the 21st of June 3 years hence, I shall, in this study, in the standard arrangement of the manor, commission you as an officer of the organization on the standing roster, in the rank of lieutenant under the master, with the seniority date of the night of the cupboard. The seniority date will be backdated by 8 years to that night. The commission will be drawn up by Walter. The commission will be signed by me. The commission will be sealed by the master. The commission will be witnessed by Miss Victoria. The commission will be entered in the standing register at the bureau on the same morning. Do you understand? Yes, madam. Are you pleased? He considered. Yes, madam. H.M. Madam, boy, I am glad. It was the only thing she said in the small instant, which was not, on the long, careful file of her conversation with him over 8 years, the kind of thing she had said before, and the boy received it with the small, careful pleasure of a junior officer who had been informed. On the available evidence that he had been received, he inclined his head 1/4 of an inch in reply. He did not, on the available file, smile, servant, mistress, walk the boy to his room, mistress, and servant, mistress. Well done, mistress. The man in the red coat inclined his head to her in the small, unstinted theatrical pleasure of a servant who had been, in the long course of his service, occasionally pleased. He turned. He held out his gloved hand. The boy took it. They went up the back stair from the south study together, the way they had gone up the back stair from the front hall together on the night the boy had arrived 8 years before. They reached the half landing. The boy paused. He looked back. Sir Integra was at the foot of the stair. She did not, on the available evidence, wave. She inclined her head once in the small private formality of a host releasing her guests, and the boy inclined his head once in reply, and they went on. At the door of the blue room, the master paused. My apprentice? Master. You have been promoted this evening. Yes, master. From police boy to fledgling, from fledgling to apprentice, from apprentice to apprentice in the field. On the appropriate morning 3 years hence, from apprentice in the field to lieutenant of the line. Yes, master. You have not, in the 8 years of our acquaintance, embarrassed me. No, master. You will not, in the 8 years to come, embarrass me. No, master, my apprentice. Master, sleep. Yes, master, he bowed in the small private bow of an officer to his lord. The master inclined his head in reply. The blue room door, which had been waiting, opened. The boy went in. The boy closed the door behind him. He stood at the window for the small, careful minute, which had become, in 8 years, the small, careful minute of his arrival in the blue room. The roses, in the early summer, were not the color of ink any longer. The roses were the color of an old wine in a wide glass. He looked at them for the minute. He turned. He removed the charcoal 3-piece. He folded the 3-piece. He laid the 3-piece across the chair. He put on the pajamas the kitchen had been keeping aired for him since the previous Christmas leave. He turned out the light. He climbed into the 4-poster bed. He listened to the house. The house listened back. The house, in 8 years, had grown the kind of fondness which an old country house grows for a junior officer it has decided is its own. The house had heard him arrive in the cellar wall by Romanian charm and depart by Bentley to a graveyard and return at 3 in the morning to a stemmed glass in the south study. The house had, in the small available register of an old country house, kept the kitchen warm and the under-housekeeper up and the blue room aired. The house was, on the available evidence, content, in the cellar at the south of the house. The master sat on the wooden chair in the dark. He did not, throughout the rest of the night, move. He inclined his head a fraction to the wall, in the small private theatrical pleasure of a man who had been informed, on the long evening of his service, that the apprentice was on the available file, asleep in the blue room. The cellar door, which had been open, closed itself. The corridor on the other side of the cellar door, which had been empty, remained empty for the rest of the night. In the kitchen at the manor at 3:30, Sandra, the night cook, brought the cook a fresh pot of black tea and turned the gas down on the pan and sat at the long pine table and read, for the small careful pleasure of a cook, reading at 3 in the morning. A back number of the wireless schedule. The Bentley, in the garage, ticked as it cooled in the small companionable manner of a long machine that had been on its road. Walter, at the rear of the house, polished the silver in the manner of a butler who had been polishing the silver in some house or other since 1942, and who would, on the available file, continue. Sarah's Victoria, in her own quarters on the second floor of the East Wing, had stripped her uniform off and was sitting at her dressing table in a long dressing gown the kitchen had let down for her over the spring, and she was humming, very quietly, the marching song the kitchen sang on the 2nd of June. Outside the window of the blue room on the 3rd floor of the South Wing, the sky over the rose garden began the long, careful business of becoming a sky over a rose garden in the early summer. The bruise on the eastern side of the house lifted by degrees. The grass made the small, unhurried adjustment of grass, deciding to be the grass of the morning. The first bird, which had been a thrush, made the small, early statement of a thrush which had decided that it would, on its own dignity, be the first bird of the morning. The boy in the blue room in the four-poster did not wake. The boy in the blue room was a junior officer of 14 who had been on the longest evening of his career and who had returned to his bed at 3, and who, by the small careful courtesy of the long bloodline of his master, would not, in the morning, ache from the work. Sir Integra, at her desk in the south study, finished her last cigarette of the evening. She set the receiver of the private line back into its cradle. She turned the lamp on the desk down a notch. She did not, on the available evidence, smile. She did, in the small private way of a woman who had decided, on the long evening of her stewardship, that the boy in the blue room had been, on the available file, hers since the cupboard, incline her head 1/4 of an inch at the empty doorway and put her gloves on and rise, and walk down the corridor to her own quarters in the long, unhurried pace of a woman who had 8 years before, on the small available evidence of a telephone receiver, suspected she had been handed an heir and who had been, on the available evidence, correct. The manner, which had heard, settled. The bruise on the eastern side of the house lifted further. The thrush continued. In the blue room, the apprentice slept.